Good morning, everybody. We are in closing arguments today. We are going to go live right now. Thank you so much for joining me. May you have a blessed day. I will hop straight into it. Okay, and here we go, y'all. The audio may not be that great. Sorry.
But the final instructions will be the correct instructions. And that'll save time. All right, so 25, intent inference should say it need not be, right? And then, let's see, what was the correction on 26 again? 26.
The other 25 was under recklessly, Your Honor. And it's the second sentence. The risk must be of such a nature and degree that disregarding it is a gross deviation.
Recklessly means the defendant is aware of and consciously disregards a substantial and justifiable risk. The risk must be of such a nature. All right.
And then 26, did you want that one? It's under the justification for self-defense. And instead of immediate on number 1, in the second sentence, it should say immediately.
Okay, they are doing the finalizing of the housekeeping with the jury instructions. And then we will have the jury come in.
Very well.
They will have closing arguments.
Let's pass out the final and jury instructions, give them to counsel and the defendant, and put one on each of the jurors' chairs. Thank you.
While they're doing that, I'm going to go get me a snack tray because I'm going to be here all day. I'll be right.
Hey, Jorge. Can you flip the screen so he can see it when you speak? Okay. So that you can see it when he. You still want to ruin your technology.
All right, let's bring in the jury.
Can we test the screen a little bit? Can you test this screen? Oh, sure.
Who's going to do the closing? I will do that. Right. Thank you. Please be seated. The record will show the presence of all the jurors, counsel, and the defendant. Ladies and gentlemen, jury, thank you for your patience. Obviously, my projections yesterday about how long this would take us didn't turn out to be accurate. So thank you for your patience. But we are now ready to proceed with the final jury instructions. Each of you has a copy of the final jury instructions. There's a couple of typographical errors that I'll point out, I think, as we go along. You're welcome to follow in the instructions as I read aloud, or just listen to what I have to say, whatever you're most comfortable with. You will have one set of these final jury instructions with you in the jury room when you are excused to deliver. So you'll have a set of these as well. All right, so the first page is a cover sheet with the caption of the case. Page 2 is where we start. It's called Duty of Jury. It is your duty as a juror to decide this case by applying these jury instructions to the facts as you determine them. You must follow these jury instructions. They are the rules you should use to decide the case. It is your duty to determine what the facts are in the case. Determine the facts only from the evidence produced in court. When I say evidence, I mean the testimony of witnesses and exhibits introduced in court. You should not guess about any fact. You must not be influenced by sympathy or prejudice. You must not be concerned with any opinion that you feel I have about the facts. You, as the jurors, are the sole judges of the facts. You must consider all of these instructions. Do not pick out one instruction or part of one and ignore the others. As you determine the facts, however, you may find that some instructions no longer apply. You must then consider the instructions that do apply together with the facts as you have determined them. The state has charged the defendant with certain crimes. A charge is not evidence against the defendant. You must not think that the defendant is guilty just because of a charge. The defendant has pled not guilty. The state, this plea of not guilty means the state must prove each element of the charges beyond a reasonable doubt.
My snack tray.
The law does not require a defendant to prove innocence. Every defendant is presumed by law to be innocent. You must start with the presumption that the defendant is innocent. It should be on the top of page 5. The state has the burden of proving the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. This means that the state must prove each element of each charge beyond a reasonable doubt. In civil cases, this is not, it is only necessary to prove that a fact is more likely true than not, or that its truth is highly probable. In criminal cases such as this, the state's proof must be more powerful than that. It must be beyond a reasonable doubt. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt is proof that leaves you firmly convinced of the defendant's guilt. There are very few things in this world that we know with absolute certainty, and in criminal cases, the law does not require proof that overcomes every doubt. If, based upon your consideration of the evidence, you are firmly convinced that the defendant is guilty of the crime charged, you must find him guilty. If, on the other hand, you think there's a real possibility that he is not guilty, you must give him the benefit of the doubt and find him not guilty. There are 3 standards of proof that we use in our legal system. 1, preponderance of the evidence. 2, clear and convincing evidence. And 3, beyond a reasonable doubt. Preponderance of the evidence is a party having the burden of proof by a preponderance of the evidence must persuade you by the evidence that the claim or fact is more probable true than not true. This means that the evidence that favors a party outweighs the opposing evidence. Clear and convincing evidence, a party having the burden of proof by clear and convincing evidence must persuade you by the evidence that a fact or a claim is highly probable. The standard is higher than the standard for proof beyond. The standard is higher than the standard for proof by a preponderance of the evidence, but it is lower than the standard for proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Now we come to the standard in this case, which is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The state has the burden of proving the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. This means that the state must prove each element, each charge beyond a reasonable doubt. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt is proof by the evidence that leaves you firmly convinced of the defendant's guilt. This standard is higher than the standard for either proof by a preponderance of the evidence or by proof by clear and convincing evidence. There are very few things in this world that we know with absolute certainty, and in criminal cases, the law does not require proof that overcomes every doubt. If based upon your consideration of the evidence, you are firmly convinced that the defendant is guilty of the crimes charged, you must find him guilty. If, on the other hand, you think there is a real possibility that he is not guilty, you must give him the benefit of the doubt and find him not guilty. You must decide whether the defendant is guilty or not guilty by determining what the facts are in the case and applying these jury instructions. You must not consider the possible punishment when deciding on guilt. Punishment is left to the judge. You are to determine what the facts in the case are from the evidence produced in court. If an objection to a question was sustained, you must disregard the question, and you must not guess what the answer to the question might have been. If an exhibit was offered into evidence and an objection to it was sustained, you must not consider that exhibit as evidence. If testimony was ordered stricken from the record, you must not consider that testimony for any purpose. The state must prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt based upon the evidence. The defendant is not required to produce evidence of any kind. The defendant's decision not to produce any evidence is not evidence of guilt. In their opening statements and in their closing arguments, the lawyers have and will talk to you about the law and the evidence. What the lawyers say is not evidence, but it may help you to understand the law and the evidence. Some of the exhibits that have been admitted into evidence have portions deleted from them for legal reasons. Do not concern yourselves with the reasons why some portions of the exhibits have been deleted. Do not speculate upon what the deleted portions might or might not reveal. Evidence may be direct or circumstantial. Direct evidence is the testimony of a witness who saw, heard, or otherwise sensed an event. Circumstantial evidence is the proof of a fact or facts from which you may find another fact. The law makes no distinction between direct and circumstantial evidence. It is for you to decide the importance to be given to the evidence regardless of whether it is direct or circumstantial. In deciding the facts of this case, you should consider what testimony to accept and what to reject. You may accept everything a witness says or part of it or none of it. In evaluating testimony, you should use the tests for truthfulness that people use in determining matters of importance in everyday life, including such factors as the witness's ability to see or hear or know the things the witness has testified to, the quality of the witness's memory, the witness's manner while testifying, whether the witness has any motive, bias, or prejudice, whether the witness was contradicted by anything the witness said or wrote before the trial, or by other evidence, and the reasonableness of the witness's testimony when considered in the light of all of the other evidence. Consider all of the evidence in the light of your reason, common sense, and your experience. The testimony of a law enforcement officer is not entitled to any greater or lesser importance or believability merely because of the fact that the witness is a law enforcement officer. You are to consider the testimony of a police officer just as you would the testimony of any other witness. A witness qualified as an expert by education or experience may state opinions on matters in that witness's field of expertise and may also state reasons for those opinions. Expert opinion testimony should be judged just as any other testimony. You are not bound by it. You may accept it or reject it in whole or in part, and you should give it as much credibility and weight as you think it deserves, considering the witness's qualifications and experience, the reasons given for the opinions, and all of the other evidence in this case. The defendant is not required to testify. The decision on whether or not to testify is left to the defendant, acting with the advice of an attorney. You must not let this choice affect your deliberations in any way. You must not consider any statements made by the defendant to a law enforcement officer unless you determine beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant made the statements voluntarily. A defendant's statement was not voluntary if it resulted from the defendant's will being overcome by a law enforcement officer's use of any sort of violence, coercion, or threats, or by any direct or implied promise, however slight. You must give such weight to the defendant's statement as you feel it deserves under all the circumstances. You have heard evidence that a witness has previously been convicted of a criminal defense. You may consider this evidence only as it may affect the witness's believability. During the trial, the court admitted evidence for certain limited purposes. In connection with that evidence, the court gave you limiting instructions. That evidence was admitted only for the limited purpose that the court stated at the time, and therefore you must consider it only for that limited purpose and not for any other purpose. Evidence of other acts that have not been charged has been presented. You may consider these acts only if you find that the state has proved by clear and convincing evidence that the defendant committed these acts. You may consider these acts to establish the defendant's preparation. You must not consider these acts to determine the defendant's character or a character trait and therefore committed the charged offense. Each count charges a separate and distinct offense. You must decide each count separately on the evidence with the law applicable to it, uninfluenced by your decision on any other count. You may find that the state has proved beyond a reasonable doubt all, some, or none of the charged offenses. Your finding for each count must be stated in a separate verdict. The state need not prove motive, but you may consider motive or lack of motive in reaching your verdicts. The crime charged of second-degree murder requires proof of one of the following. One, defendant intentionally caused the death of Gabriel Cuen Buitimea, thereafter abbreviated as GCB. Or two, the defendant caused the death of GCB by conduct which the defendant knew would cause death or serious physical injury. Or three, under circumstances manifesting extreme indifference to human life, the defendant recklessly engaged in conduct that created a grave risk of death and thereby caused the death of GCB. The risk must be such that disregarding it was a gross deviation from what a reasonable person in the defendant's situation would have done. The crime of second-degree murder, which I just described, includes the lesser offense of manslaughter and the lesser offense of negligent homicide. So now we're going to discuss the elements of the offense of those two additional lesser included offenses. Manslaughter. You may consider the lesser offense of manslaughter if either, one, you find the defendant not guilty of second-degree murder, or after a full and careful consideration of the facts, you cannot agree on whether to find the defendant guilty or not guilty of second-degree murder. Reckless manslaughter requires proof that the defendant recklessly caused the death of another person. Reckless manslaughter, the crime of manslaughter, requires proof that the defendant caused the death of another person and was aware of and showed a conscious disregard of a substantial and unjustifiable risk of death. The risk must be such that disregarding it was a gross deviation from the standard of conduct that a reasonable person would observe in the situation. Second-degree murder and manslaughter may both result from recklessness. The difference is that the culpable recklessness involved in manslaughter is less than the culpable recklessness involved in second-degree murder. We should be at the top of page 24. If you determine that the defendant is guilty of either second-degree murder or manslaughter, but you have a reasonable doubt as to which it was, you must find the defendant guilty of manslaughter. You must unanimously agree that the state has proven manslaughter beyond a reasonable doubt before you may find the defendant guilty of manslaughter. The other lesser included offense is negligent homicide. Negligent homicide. You may consider the lesser offense of negligent homicide if either, one, you find the defendant not guilty of second-degree murder and not guilty of manslaughter, or after a full and careful deliberation of the facts, you cannot agree on whether to find the defendant guilty or not guilty of second-degree murder or manslaughter. The crime of negligent homicide requires proof that the defendant, one, caused the death of another person, and two, failed to recognize a substantial and unjustifiable risk of causing the death of another person. The risk must be of such a nature and degree that the failure to perceive it is a gross deviation from what a reasonable person would observe in the situation. The distinction between manslaughter and negligent homicide is this. For manslaughter, the defendant must have been aware of a substantial risk and consciously disregarded that risk, that his conduct would cause death. Negligent homicide only requires that the defendant failed to recognize the risk. If you determine that the defendant is guilty of either manslaughter or negligent homicide, but you have a reasonable doubt as to which it was, you must find the defendant guilty of negligent homicide. You cannot find the defendant guilty of any lesser included offense unless you find the state has proved each element of the lesser included offense beyond a reasonable doubt. Now we go to, I think it's count 2 of the information, the second charge, which is aggravated assault. The crime of aggravated assault requires proof of the following. One, that the defendant committed an assault on Daniel Ramirez. And two, the assault was aggravated by the following factor, that the defendant used a deadly weapon or dangerous instrument during the assault. Now, the definition of assault is as follows. The crime of assault requires the proof that the defendant intentionally placed Daniel Ramirez in reasonable apprehension of imminent physical injury. Now we have some definitions of some of the terms used in defining the elements of the offense. Knowingly. Knowingly means that a defendant acted with awareness of or belief in the existence of conduct or circumstances constituting an offense. It does not mean that a defendant must have known that the conduct is forbidden by law. Intentionally or with intent to, as used in these instructions, means that a defendant's objective is to cause the results or to engage in that conduct. Intent and an inference. Intent may be inferred from all the facts and circumstances disclosed by the evidence. There should be a word it, and the final instructions will read, it need not be established exclusively by direct sensory proof. The existence of intent is one of the questions of fact for your determination. Recklessly or reckless disregard means that a defendant is aware of and consciously disregards a substantial and unjustifiable risk that the conduct will result in death. The risk must be of such a nature and degree that disregarding it is a gross deviation from what a reasonable person would do in that situation. Physical force means force used upon or directed towards the body of another person, and this includes confinement, but does not include deadly physical force. Physical injury means the impairment of a physical condition. A deadly weapon means anything designed for lethal use, including a firearm. Deadly physical force means either one, force which is used with the purpose of causing death or serious physical injury, or two, force which is used, or two, force which in the manner of its use is capable of creating a substantial risk of causing death or serious physical injury. Justification, use of physical force. A defendant is justified in using physical force as follows. The use or threat of physical force or deadly physical force is justified only while the use or threat of physical force or deadly physical force is justified only while the apparent danger continues, and it ends when the apparent danger ends. The force used may not be greater than reasonably necessary to defend against the apparent danger. The use of physical force or deadly physical force is justified if a reasonable person in the situation would have reasonably believed that imminent physical danger appeared to be present.
Immediate physical danger, not imminent.
Okay, thank you. Let me correct that. If I misspoke, I'll start at that paragraph again. Thank you. The use of physical force or deadly physical force is justified if a reasonable person in the situation would have reasonably believed that immediate physical danger appeared to be present. Actual danger is not necessary to justify the use of physical force or deadly physical force. The state has the burden of proving beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant did not act with such justification. If the state fails to carry this burden, then you must find the defendant not guilty of the charge. A defendant is justified in using or threatening physical force in self-defense if the following two conditions existed. One, a reasonable person in the situation would have believed that physical force was, and that should say, immediately necessary to protect against another's use or apparent attempted or threatened use of unlawful physical force. And two, the defendant used or threatened no more physical force than would have been necessary to a reasonable person in the situation. A defendant may use deadly physical force in self-defense only to protect against another's use or apparent attempted or threatened use of deadly physical force. Self-defense justifies the use or threat of physical force or deadly physical force only while the apparent danger continues, and it ends when the apparent danger ends. The force used may not be greater than reasonably necessary to defend against the apparent danger. The use of physical force is justified if a reasonable person in the situation would have reasonably believed that immediate physical danger appeared to be present. Actual danger is not necessary to justify the use of physical force in self-defense. You must decide whether a reasonable person in a similar situation would believe that physical force was immediately necessary to protect against another's use or attempted use or threatened use or apparent attempted use or apparent threatened use of unlawful physical force, or you must measure the defendant's belief against what a reasonable person in the situation would have believed. The use or the threat or use of physical force is not justified, 1, in response to verbal provocation alone, 2, to resist an arrest the defendant knew or should have known was being made by a peace officer or by a person acting in a peace officer's presence, or at the peace officer's direction, whether the arrest was lawful or unlawful, unless the physical force used by a peace officer exceeded that allowed by law. Or 3, the defendant provoked the other's use of unlawful physical force, unless the defendant withdrew from the encounter or clearly communicated to the other person the defendant's intent to withdraw, reasonably believing that the defendant could not withdraw from the encounter, and B, the other person nevertheless continued or attempted to use unlawful physical force against the defendant. The state has the burden of proving beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant did not act with such justification. If the state fails to carry this burden, then you must find the defendant not guilty of the charge. A defendant is justified in using or threatening deadly force in self-defense if the following 2 conditions existed. 1, a reasonable person in the situation would have believed that deadly physical force was immediately necessary to protect against another's use or apparent attempted or threatened use of unlawful deadly physical force, and 2, the defendant used or threatened no more deadly physical force than would have appeared necessary to a reasonable person in the situation. A defendant may use deadly physical force in self-defense only to protect against another's use or apparent attempted or threatened use of deadly physical force. Self-defense justifies the use or threat of deadly physical force only while the apparent danger continues, and it ends when the apparent danger ends. The force used may not be greater than reasonably necessary to defend against the apparent danger. The use of deadly physical force is justified if a reasonable person in the situation would have reasonably believed that immediate deadly physical danger appeared to be present. Actual danger is not necessary to justify the use of deadly physical force in self-defense. You must decide whether a reasonable person in a similar situation would believe that deadly physical force was immediately necessary to protect against another's use or attempted use or threatened use or apparent attempted use or apparent threatened use of unlawful deadly physical force. You must measure the defendant's belief against what a reasonable person in the situation would have believed. A defendant has no duty to retreat before threatening or using deadly physical force in self-defense if the defendant, 1, had a legal right to be in the place where the use or threatened deadly physical force in self-defense occurred, and 2, was not engaged in an unlawful act at the time when the use or threatened deadly physical force in self-defense occurred. The state has the burden of proving beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant did not act with such justification. If the state fails to carry this burden, then you must find the defendant not guilty of the charge. The next charge concerns the justification for defense of a third person, a different person. A defendant is justified in using or threatening physical force in defense of a third person if the following 2 conditions existed. 1, a reasonable person in the situation would have believed that physical force was necessary to protect another's use or attempted use or apparent attempted use or threatened use of unlawful physical force against a third person. And 2, the defendant used or threatened no more physical force than would have appeared necessary to a reasonable person in the situation. A defendant may use deadly physical force in defense of a third person only to protect another's use or attempted use or apparent attempted use or threatened use of deadly physical force. Defense of a third person justifies the use or threat of physical force or deadly physical force only while the danger continues, and it ends when the danger ends. The force used may not be greater than reasonably necessary to defend against the danger. Actual danger is not necessary to justify the use of physical force or deadly physical force in defense of a third person. The use of physical force or deadly physical force is justified if a reasonable person in the situation would have reasonably believed that immediate physical danger appeared to be present. You must decide whether a reasonable person in a similar situation would believe that, one, physical force was necessary to protect against another's use or attempted use or apparent attempted use or threatened use of unlawful physical force against a third person, or two, deadly physical force was necessary to protect against another's use, attempted use, or apparent attempted use or threatened use of physical force against the third person. You must measure the defendant's belief against what a reasonable person in the situation would have believed. The state has the burden of proving beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant did not act with such justification. If the state fails to carry this burden, you must find the defendant not guilty of the charge. The next charge relates to justification of premises. A defendant in lawful possession or control of the premises is justified in threatening to use deadly physical force, and there it should say, or in using physical force, or in, and it should say, attempting to use physical force, or in threatening to use physical force in defense of premises, if a reasonable person in the situation would have believed it immediately necessary to prevent or terminate the commission or attempted commission of criminal trespass by another person in or upon the premises. The use of force may not be greater than reasonably necessary to prevent the attempted criminal trespass. An actual criminal trespass is not necessary to justify the use of physical force in defense of premises. A defendant is justified in defending premises if the defendant reasonably believed that a criminal trespass was being committed or attempted. You must measure the defendant's belief against what a reasonable person in the situation would have believed. The defense ends when the attempted or actual criminal trespass ends. The state has the burden of proving beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant did not act with such justification. If the state fails to carry this burden, then you must find the defendant not guilty of the charge. Now, here's some additional definitions. Criminal trespass is knowingly entering in or remaining unlawfully in or on a residential structure or in a fenced residential yard. Premises means any real property and any structure, movable or immovable, permanent or temporary, adapted for both human residence and lodging, whether occupied or not. A residential structure means any structure, movable or immovable, permanent or temporary, adapted for both human residence and lodging, whether occupied or not. Fenced residential yard means a unit of real property immediately surrounding or adjacent to a residential structure and enclosed by a fence, wall, building, or similar barrier, or any combination thereof. Right. Final two instructions are instructions I'm going to give you after the closing arguments and when I send you out to deliver it. So that concludes the final instructions. Were there any corrections that the court must read? Anything else other than
Thank you, Jesus.
No, not from the state, Your Honor.
It's vitally important.
So, ladies and gentlemen, you put those aside. Again, you'll have corrected with those typographic errors. You'll have corrected the final instructions with you in the jury room when you retire to deliver it. With that, the state can begin its opening and closing argument. Mr. Jennings.
Okay, y'all, we're going to do closing arguments. One thing I want to say is it's vitally important I'm going to try and take notes. That they get these instructions right, because cases can be won or lost by those.
Good morning. This is the first time I've been able to address you directly. Once again, my name is Mike Jetty, and I want to just echo what Ms. Hunley said at the beginning. We appreciate your attentiveness during the entire trial. It's been 4 weeks, so we appreciate the time and devotion you have, because it's a very important duty we have here. I'm going to start off by saying that I'm not going to go over every fact. I'm not. Our job here is to take the wheat from the chaff here and focus in on the important things in this case. Our goal here is to simplify. So if there's a fact that I didn't cover, don't read into that. You're the deciders of the facts to apply to the law the judge just read. Okay?
Gosh, the volume's horrible.
State v. Kelly
I don't
this
need an option
occurred
for
on
caption.
January 30th of 2023. Oh, I'm sorry. Was this? The whole thing was not. I'm sorry, Lydia. That's my bad. Like I said, my job here is not to go over every fact in this case. State v. Kelly is an event that occurred on January 30th, 2023. Gabriel and Daniel were in the U.S. seeking the American dream. Yes, both were undocumented migrants. Both were escaping extreme poverty. The defendant sees Gabriel and Daniel running back to Mexico. Not just running back to Mexico, 115 yards from his property, beyond 2 fence lines. And they're running because earlier they found Border Patrol. The group scattered and the 2 took off. The defendant sees them beyond the 2 fence lines, 115 yards away, picks up his AK-47 that keeps by the patio door, steps outside of that patio, on that patio door, or the patio area, and without verbal warning, without a shout, without any indication to both Gabriel and Daniel, points that weapon at these 2 men and shoots over and over and over again, 9 times. Gabriel was judged that day and sentenced to death by the defendant. Picture of Gabriel. And that's a picture of the AK-47, the weapon used. That weapon can fire 30 rounds in 6 seconds. You were out there. We had a jury view. I forget which week it is now. I think it was last week. And that's a view from the patio and the gravel. This is 14 months ago. So obviously there's new growth out there. We were all out there. You see that's an individual out there. This is the site view for the patio and gravel. You saw
But he's
this
got a
picture
black jacket on,
earlier in
not
opening.
camouflaged. Makes it a whole lot easier to
That
see him.
is Detective Barba out in the distance. Question you have to ask, is that a threat? Is that a threat to you? The answer is no, it's not a threat to the defendant.
Can be. He's got a long rifle.
Gabriel in the high grass, lights in the background of the Kelly's home. Position of the body, orientation of the body, the injury matches up directly with the defendant's home. That's the injury wound caused by the projectile, which matches up with the defendant's home.
Look at the backpack pulled over his head. Oh!
That's a picture rolled over.
Oh! No! They did not. That's not true. You can move a couple steps. Oh, okay.
We'll
Whoa.
go past one fence line, we're gonna pass a second fence line. This is a distance here. 115 yards. We're gonna see some red cones here where the victim's body was located.
This is a double-edged sword.
And we
He's
all
proving
stood out there in that site.
are. That's a
I'm
double-edged
just
sword.
gonna pivot.
Bring it down to eye level. I have a drone. Bring it down to eye level. Lie it down to eye level and you can see whether or not that was a path. Mm.
You heard from GPS that they took the drone footage and put it on a mapping of some sort, and it gives us this GPS mapping. The blue line on the left-hand side, that's a north-south directional line. The red one, east and west. And that green line is the patio to the victim's body. And that's the orientation of the victim's body. We'll say it again. Matches perfectly from the patio to the victim, the orientation of the body. The defendant shot 9 times. The
Mm-mm.
charge, secondary murder and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon.
I'll be back.
Secondary murder, you heard from Ms. Hunley in the opening, is a unified offense. There's 3 ways to prove it. You don't have to agree on all 3 ways, but you have to agree on secondary murder. First way, Kelly intentionally caused Gabriel's death. You walk out on a patio and point a gun at someone and shoot 9 times. That's intent. Kelly caused Gabriel's death by conduct Kelly knew would cause the death or serious physical injury. An AK-47 is a serious weapon. This ain't no play toy. When you fire it 9 times at a human being, it's a serious activity. Third, under circumstances manifesting extreme indifference to human life, Kelly recklessly engaged in conduct that created a grave risk of death and thereby caused Gabriel's death. The risk must be such that disregarding it was a gross deviation from what a reasonable person in the defendant's situation would have done. 2 men walking southbound, no danger to you, and you don't even give a warning? Hey, get off my property. Get off my property. Or just sit back and let them continue on. Facts of this case. Gabriel and Daniel were shot at. Gabriel is dead, killed by a high-powered weapon. An AK-47 is such a weapon. Kelly wound is to the right side back. Exit wound, the chest. Consistent with the direction of the defendant's home. Defendant's words on his dispatch or BP to dispatch to officers and during Detective Ianza's interview, inconsistent. Every single time the story changed. Every single time the story changed. Daniel's words, consistent. Heard an AK-47, horse saved his life, heading southbound. I just want to repeat real quick since we're on Daniel. Daniel's the only one in this courtroom, on this hill, and likely in the city of Nogales, who's ever been shot at with an AK-47 9 times and be next to a friend who just died. So maybe during his testimony, distance and time is a little skewed. Just maybe. He knows it's an AK-47. He knows it's a red horse who saved him, and he's heading southbound. Defendant steps out, no verbal warning. Defendant shot his AK-47 9 times. The shell casings found the ejection pattern that matches what DPS forensic scientist Burnell is consistent with the ejection patterns and position orientation of the body. Once again, matches up with only one known shooter. For instruction, there's also a lesser included. So if you do not find beyond a reasonable doubt the defendant caused second-degree murder, you can consider manslaughter. And manslaughter, as a judge read, and you'll have jury instructions, and we'll spend too much time on this, it requires proof the defendant caused the death of another person, and the defendant was aware of and showed a conscious disregard of a substantial and unjustifiable risk of death. Stepping on a patio with an AK-47, shooting at 2 armed men walking southbound, no danger to you. If you don't find second-degree murder, and you don't find manslaughter, you can consider negligent homicide. Negligent homicide requires proof of the defendant caused the death of another person. The defendant failed to recognize a substantial and unjustifiable risk of causing the death of another person. Aggravated assault, second charge. Aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. The defendant committed an assault against Daniel, and the defendant used a deadly weapon, an AK-47. Assault requires the defendant intentionally puts Daniel in a reasonable apprehension of imminent physical injury. Steps outside with an AK-47 and shoots that gun. And that's the horse, according to Daniel, saved his life. He recognized that horse. He identified that horse. That's the defendant's horse. And that horse was between him and the Kelly's residence. Defendant's words. I'm not admitting to anything I've done, but all those things tend to add up. And they do. Removing the wheat from the chaff here. Agent Marcel, first witness for the state. 2:30 phone call. I'm going to summarize these for you. First phone call. I'm being shot at. I'm shooting back. There are 5 people, all packs, with packs running southbound. I'm being shot at, and I'm shooting back. 5 individuals in this story. That's at 2:30 in the afternoon. 6 minutes later, defendant changes that story. I had an altercation with someone. I heard a gunshot in his direction, in my direction. Inspected his horse while they spoke. I'm gonna argue he inspected his horse because he shot his gun 9 times. He wanted to make sure he didn't shoot his own horse. They were too far to tell if any of them had firearms. And that's probably the most truthful thing he says here. Because you were out there, 115 yards is pretty dang far away to see a firearm on an individual. 2:40, 10 minutes after that first phone call. And what's happening in the background with 2:30 is BP is now communicating to SO dispatch. And SO dispatch is doing a code 3 alert, and lights and sirens going off, and all SO people are responding to scene because to them, they think it's an active shooter. We want law enforcement to believe when we call them, we want them to believe the story. They're not here to second guess it. So lights and sirens are going. And 10 minutes after that phone call, respond, active shooter response. You heard testimony. Goal is number 1, preservation of life. BP locates a defendant near his barn. You heard Agent Heredia on the stand. He appeared calm. 10 minutes after being shots fired, I'm
No,
shooting
Mary.
back, the defendant is
My
calm.
mic was muted.
He's calm.
Y'all, we're taking a
Carrying
poll.
AK-47, walking with his
Comment
two
it, leave in the
labs.
comments how long do you think the jury's going to deliberate
No
for
one
in a
located
Starbucks?
on the property on a
Not
security
this
subpoena.
one, but one like
No
it.
one. 3 p.m., defendant says people were possibly carrying rifles. Possibly now. We went from I'm in a shootout to too far to tell. Now, maybe not, maybe so. They were 100 to 150 yards away from his property. Castaneda told the defendant that if anything like this happened again, don't do anything, call 911, stay in your house. And his response, understood it. He said, I'm going to do what he had to do to protect his property. He was conscious of the consequences. He would take responsibility for his actions. Talking to BP and SO, the defendant never admits that he shot his AK-47. We've got Border Patrol and agents on scene for an active shooter situation, and you failed to tell them that you shot your own weapon? Never told law enforcement that anyone pointed a gun at him. Didn't tell anyone. This just happened. This literally just happened. And you're not telling a single soul that people are shooting at you? Never told law enforcement he was in fear of his life. 423, he's calling. I think this is a thank you call for Agent Marcel to get a quick response to him. In this call, he says now, instead of 5 folks, we have 10 to 15, all loaded with AR-style rifles. We're getting exaggerated statement here now. 523, this is the second wave of phone calls. That was the first wave, active shooter call, and now we got the calls and dispatch recording related to Gabriel's body. Jeremy, this is Alan Kelly. You need to call me immediately. This is serious. Call me immediately. I can't say more on the phone. Why can't you say more on the phone? Why can't you say more on the phone? 526, he sends that text message. 535, here comes the 4th phone call. This is worse than you can imagine. This is bad. Marcel told Kelly, call 911 and talk to SO. He never does. He never calls the SO. The SO calls him. Because Marcel does what a Border Patrol agent is supposed to do. If there's an immediate emergency, he routes a call to the local law enforcement, which is the SO. And the SO then, without him calling, calls him to find out what's going on, what's so serious, and why immediate response again. You know how shots were fired earlier? Something was possibly struck. Just say, there's a body on my property. Just say it. When Marcel asked for additional details, Kelly said, I can't tell you over the phone. Ask Marcel if this was being reported. It's a noteworthy question right there. This is that dispatch call. Do I have my microphone? Let's see if we play it.
Sorry, y'all. You see me with this. I'm a volunteer firefighter, and it was going off. Oh, no, they're not playing the call. Yep, they're going to play call. This ought to be interesting.
Hello? Hi, sir. I'm calling from the Sargent County Sheriff's serious, ma'am, and I'm not gonna talk over the telephone.
Okay, I understand it's serious, but I need more
He's
context.
worried
in
that
order
there's
to
other
send
people still in the
deputy.
area.
Okay, fine. It's gonna be,
Go ahead,
well-
you can talk to me. What's going on?
yeah, I know I can talk to you, but you're responsible for what I say, and I'm responsible for what I say.
Can you give me a little context of what happened? What's going on?
This is the only possible damning evidence they have against
You
him.
told him that
I'm
you
not
shot
sure.
at- What did you shoot at?
I didn't shoot at I haven't said I shot at anything.
Okay, well, that's what Border Patrol told us, so that's why I'm just asking you.
Border
Yeah,
Patrol
yeah.
said it. He didn't.
Y'all guys, the Nogales Sheriff Department had 4 or 5 guys out here this afternoon investigating a Border Patrol drug running incident. And I don't know if I can't remember the officer's name. There was 2 gentlemen and 2 young ladies. And they third. You know who I'm talking about? They came out to 100 Willer Cross Circle.
You mean for my deputies, correct?
Yeah, they were Nogales.
Yes, aware of what happened earlier.
You're aware? Okay, then they're aware of what happened, and I don't want to get you in trouble, and I don't want to get me in trouble, but I don't want to break the law or anything like that. So what I'm telling you is that we need a sheriff deputy out here, 100 Willer Cross Circle, immediately, and that's all I can say, ma'am.
Okay, is anyone hurt? I need to know because if someone's hurt, I need to send an ambulance too.
There's no.
Okay, do you feel more comfortable talking to a deputy over the phone?
Well, in other words, okay, you know the thing, you have the right to remain silent, and anything you can,
I understand.
anything you say can and will be held against you. And of course, I'm not admitting to anything I've done, but, all those things tend to add up, and I don't know what happened. I just know what I just saw about 15 minutes ago. And it's something that an ambulance cannot help. EMTs cannot help. There's nothing out here that can be aided by EMT or emergency services.
Okay, I understand you don't want to give me a lot of details, but what you are requesting an officer from me, so I needed to know for their own safety and your safety a little bit of what's happening, what's going on.
Okay, I'll put it like this. Last spring out here, there was a pickup found on East Sagebrush with a dead lady in it. I don't know if you knew of that or not.
Yes, sir. I'm aware of what happened.
Okay, it's a situation similar to that. How's that?
Okay.
You follow it? You understand what I'm saying? It's a situation exactly like that.
Okay.
And so that's going to require the sheriff to come out here.
Okay. Can you tell me a description of?
No, I don't have a description. There's not a vehicle.
Okay.
The only thing that I was referring to in conjunction with that accident was the body.
Okay.
You got it?
Okay. All right. Okay. Can I have your name?
Yes, George Kelly.
George Kelly. Okay, George. Would you, if my deputy goes over there, would you take him to whatever it is that you found?
Yes. I have it marked. I have a flashlight on over it. Because it's going to be dark when he gets here probably, but I'll take it to him.
And you are sure an EMT cannot help?
I am positive. I have a medical background. An EMT cannot help.
Okay. Do you know whoever it is that you saw?
No, I do not know. I didn't say it was anybody. I just said it was a body.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right.
I'm not trying to be smart, ma'am. I'm just
I
trying to.
understand, you're trying to be careful, and I get that. However, I hope you understand that on my end, I have to take care of my deputies too. So I
Yes, I
need a little
understand.
bit more context as to why you needed a deputy to head out there.
Now you know that there is a body here.
Okay, all right, does it look, somewhat?
And it's not alive, so you asked, did you need EMT? I said, no.
Okay.
I'm sure a coroner will be involved sooner or later.
I understand, George, can you tell me something? Is it discolored from somewhere?
Is it discolored?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Has it been there for a while, can you tell?
From what, in that I only approached the body to make sure that the animal, is not a vegetable or a mineral. The animal wasn't alive and it was not alive.
Okay.
There were no signs, there was no signs of blood. There was just an animal laying face down.
An animal?
An animal, and you know what an animal is, it's not a vegetable or a mineral.
Okay.
It's a body, and you know what I'm talking
I
about.
understand what you're talking about, George. Okay, I'm gonna send the deputy then over to your house so you can lead them over to wherever you found what it is.
Okay.
you found, okay?
And now, maybe one of the deputies are out here, they know how to get here, because it's 100 Willow Cross Circle, and it's kind of hard to find. It's a ramp right on the border.
So I have one of my deputies that responded earlier going over your way.
There, that's good. You do that, they know how to get here, and I'll have the gate open.
Okay, sounds good, George. Thank you. Thank you for
I appreciate your help and your patience, and I'm sorry if
no problem. I understand.
okay,
Okay.
bye.
Thank you.
That's a phone call SO had to make to the defendant. And it says it's very serious. Recap, very serious. Can't tell, am I going to talk over the telephone? I don't want to get me in trouble. I'm not admitting to anything I've done, but all those things tend to add up. Detective Lopez gets on scene. That's Exhibit 38. I'm not going to play that for you, but that's admitted into evidence. That's that recording that Deputy Lopez recorded. He says in that, quote, defendant, I have no idea, I have no idea, I have no idea. You know, if you were me, you got no idea. You know what I'm saying? You literally shot your gun 9 times, and you've got no idea what possibly could have happened. Sergeant Rodriguez gets on scene, 6:15. Sergeant Rodriguez is the one that pronounces Gabriel dead. That's not the time of death. That's the pronouncement of death by law enforcement. No pulse, extremities are cold, but his torso was still a little warm. Importantly, there's no drag marks, blood trails, or foot traffic evidence anywhere. It appeared as though Gabriel fell where he was shot. At this point, Sergeant Rodriguez does not know Dr. Tim's autopsy results. A severed aorta. That's a drop shot.
Okay, next up is remote ID.
The entry wound lined up with the east patio of the Kelly residence. Again, entry wound and orientation lines up. And then the defendant has an interview with Detective Ainza. In that question, he says, question, did you shoot? I have no reason to believe I shot this person. Ainza, what does that mean? Defendant, it means I have no reason to believe I shot him. That's simple. Question, did you shoot? No response. No response. Detective Ainza at this stage has already talked to Border Patrol. He's already talked to dispatch. He's already talked to SO. So Detective Ainza has information. And during an interview, He's not going to disclose the information. He wants the defendant to talk to him. It does not say he shot his weapon. And until 30 minutes into this interview, a 50-minute interview, he finally does. And this is the interaction. Look at me. I can see it in your eyes. Defendant, I haven't said I didn't shoot. Did you shoot? No response. Towards these gentlemen. No, I did not shoot at those gentlemen. Did you shoot? All the Detective Inez is trying to figure out is, did you shoot? And finally he says, yes. Then he says, I shot over their heads. Shot over their heads.
I'm trying to hold my tongue, y'all.
Says it this time.
Thank you for joining me. I appreciate you.
I need
Please
to ask
comment,
if
like,
it's
and
100
subscribe.
meters away.
Click the share button.
He affirms that.
I appreciate it.
He
Thank you in
says
advance.
you were armed. Remember an earlier statement, too far to tell? You were out there. And I shot 100 yards over their heads. I didn't shoot at them. I shot over their heads.
My
Is it you
son's
shot
been,
towards the direction of their heads?
steal some of my snacks.
Yes. Does not admit he shot his AK-47 until 30 minutes into that interview.
You didn't
So all
ask
the
him.
pictures of the shell casings, you're out unseen. Right next to, if I'm on the patio, they're right to my right. 8 shell casings found. And those are the 9 total. 1 in blue, found by the ATF K9. K9 alerted the evening of, that's around 12:30
But he didn't alert
in the
for the
morning.
other 8.
And the next day when it's light out, they found the other 8 shell casings in yellow. And that ejection pattern, as we're going to see in a second here, is consistent with the ejection pattern of DPS forensic scientist Brunel's review of that weapon shooting the exact same rounds.
Not true. Depends on how you were holding the gun.
We get to the AK-47. Where was this gun? Where was this gun that he keeps by the patio door?
That's how my
Hanging
grandpa
up
stored
on a
his.
coat rack on a bedroom door behind his sweatshirt. And the only reason it was found was Sergeant Flores opens the door stops its momentum, but the gun continued and bumped the back of the door.
That's how my grandpa kept his at night when he slept.
This weapon.
Not a crime. Not hiding. That looks exactly like my grandpa's
What's
back
not
door
true in
when
this
he
case?
was in the bedroom.
What's not? There is no evidence of a mysterious shot. None. The only person in this courtroom who's ever said anything about mysterious shot is the defendant.
Y'all, he did not have
His
to call
wife
Border Patrol.
doesn't even say she heard a shot. And you heard when Ms. Hunley had Ms. Kelly on the stand, you wonder why we asked the question, what were you watching? I was watching a news show. What was the volume? It was on 20 out of a range of 100. You're in your living room. Your husband's in the kitchen. He hears a gunshot and you don't. And you're watching and listening to news at a medium volume.
Probably
It's
had
a
closed
mysterious,
captioning on.
magical gunshot in this case.
I watched it 20
No
minutes
evidence
to
that it
connect it to
exists.
my hearing aid.
None. The other one is the boogeyman. We've got a lot of armed men on the property. It went from 5 to 10 to 15, all carrying packs, all with rifles, walking this property. They changed the number, they changed the distance. They're creating a fear here of the boogeyman being there. There's no evidence, none. We have 2 migrants coming to the U.S., heading back to Mexico, who get shot at. Defendant under fire, no evidence whatsoever. They did a search with a metal detector from the house to the victim, no other shell casings, and from the victim out, no round or other shell casings. None. No damage to the house. If you're being shot at, if you're in your house and you're being shot at, where's the damage to the house?
Someone was being shot at. It's called the victim.
No evidence of drug packs or drugs. No evidence of robbery or theft. No evidence of struggling or dragging. None.
That's your thought.
Someone else must have shot the victim because the victim stumbled over. This is a severed aorta. You don't stumble around.
Okay.
You heard Dr.
Yeah.
Kim. You may take 1 or 2 steps and may utter a gasping phrase or two, and you're done. In voir dire, I think it was mentioned by counsel that this is a shoddy, I'm paraphrasing, this is a shoddy investigation. Here's everyone involved in this investigation. Local law enforcement, we've got Border Patrol agents, we've got DPS, we've got outside experts, medical examiner, we've got a guy from Washington, Mr. Wyatt, we've got Mr. Telsell from the East Coast, and we have the FBI. This is a thorough investigation. This is Agent Douglas, who you heard on the stand testify about downloads from the defendant's cell phone. You saw that? AK getting a lot of work. 33 dealt with this week. AK hot. AK hot again. It's either fight or run. I'm too old to run. There's BP cameras out there. Anything like this? Expert witness you saw, I mentioned him earlier, DPS forensic scientist Brudenell, talked about the functionality of that AK-47. It works, it's operable. Talked about the ejection pattern, which is consistent with his testing with the results on the scene. Rounds coming out to the right. Doesn't matter if you're right-handed or left-handed. No matter, the projectiles are coming out of the right-hand side of the gun. The injury is consistent with a long-range shot. Why do we know that? Well, we have 2 things we got going on here. We have GSR, we have that cloud from a gun. When you shoot a gun, there's a cloud of particulars that come out. And you heard testimony that usually within 20 feet, some of that cloud dust is going to come on to the person. Well, there is no GSR in this case, which means only other reason is you're further than 20 feet from the victim. That's what it means. This ain't no close range shot of holding a backpack and doing a gangster style shot. That's not what's going on here. Because there would be a cloud. There'd be gun residue all over that person, all over him. There's none. You heard the witnesses. They damped the clothes all around and submitted to Ms. Telsell. You heard testimony. No GSR found, which means further than 20 feet. I think it's easy to say that 115 yards is further than 20 feet. We also heard from DNA and fingerprint analysts from DPS. The reason we did is we're doing a thorough investigation here. We're demonstrating to you, you deserve to know that the government is doing a thorough investigation. That's our job. And there is none. Not surprising. There's only 2 people involved in this case. Or 3, count Daniel. Rick Wyatt, expert from Washington, talk about ballistics, talk about the wound, the bullet used is consistent with the wound, shooting reconstruction, and he talks about the bullet being in yaw. I call it a wobble. It hit something on his way. It hit something on his path. So instead of being like a nice little spiral, it's like a duck, like someone throwing a duck football. There's a little spiral off. When it hits that body, that's why the entry wound's a little off. And you saw the scene, mesquite trees all around, can hit a branch anytime. It was Rick Wyan who asked SO to go cut that branch, just to double check. There's no evidence on the branch. It was an indication to you all why the bullet is in yaw. It hit something before it hit, and that's why there's no bullet wipe, which means when the bullet's carrying some of that particulates on its way, on its journey, and when it enters the body, it's going to leave what we call a bullet wipe. And there is no bullet wipe in this case, because that bullet is in yaw, because it hit something before hitting the victim. There's no mystery to that. Ms. Telsell talked about no GSR found. You heard from Dr. Tim, cause and manner of death, homicide, bullet wound, injuries consistent with an AK type weapon, from collapse to possible step or two, there is no walking with that injury. There is no walking, stumbling around. There is not. Then I just want to talk about the skeleton, because that was demonstrative used in this case, where defense counsel put the rod, the trajectory rod, through the skeleton and said that must have been the trajectory of that round. That's kind of like a gangster style shooting where you're trying to take the backpack and you're coming up from underneath and you're shooting. You heard Dr. Tim talk about this, and you heard Daniel. Possible reason number one, when someone shoots a weapon at you, what's your reaction? To duck. And the moment you duck, you line that body up. The second, you heard Dr. Tim say, once it hits that rib cage, it gets deflected inside the body. There's two reasons why that is the way it is. Not because there's a robbery, not because there's 5 guys out there trying to take quote unquote drugs off the victim. Entry wound, like I said, in yaw. Exit wound, coming out of the body. It's interesting. Had my gun, shot my gun. He says that 2:30.
He's still going, y'all.
Doesn't tell Marcel ever again. She had a couple conversations with Marcel after that. Does not tell him. Does not tell BP Heredia on scene. Had my gun, shot my gun. Does not say that. Does not say to Deputy Monreal on scene. Does not say had my gun, shot my gun. Does not say it. Castaneda on scene. Does not say had my gun, shot my gun. These are officers who are responding to a code 3. This is lights and sirens. This is an emergency. Does not tell Deputy Lopez, had my gun, shot my gun in this event. Does not tell Sergeant Rodriguez, who's the one who pronounced the victim dead, I had my gun and shot my gun. Does not say anything. Nothing. And you wonder why no one's looking for shell casings around the property? Because no one knows, quote, he shot his gun. No one knows that.
They should, because he told them when they were there earlier.
Detective Aienza, and he's here at the station. The defense never says, had my gun, shot my gun. Never. And Aienza, after 30 minutes, he finally admits, had my gun, shot my gun. Dispatch supervisor, Ms. Huerta. Defense exhibit JJJ. At 3:05, Border Patrol contacted Wanda Kelly. And Wanda Kelly, according to dispatch, says, my husband's giving chase. Okay. Husband's giving chase. And to their story, there's 5 armed gunmen with AR-style weapons on my property. There's a shootout, and you're going to take your weapon and go chase them. You heard it on the dispatch log. It's exhibit JJJ. You guys can pull it up. Canines and the defendant and the canines are on scene first. And it says, there's a quote, canines disturbing the scene. Canines are at the body. 642, Rodriguez is trying to confirm with Border Patrol the subject struck something. There's no jumping to conclusions. None whatsoever. He's asking for confirmation and he gets confirmation. Deputy Castaneda, this is Wanda's statement when he's on scene. 5 individuals, some carrying rifles. Defendant grabs his rifle, he keeps by the door, not hanging in the bedroom door under a sweatshirt, keeps it by the door. Went outside, heard shots outside. Does not say the shots she heard were the defendant's shots. And then he takes off and leaves her to go chase the marauders. Defendant states that they were running south in pursuit. Importantly, Castaneda on scene, no rifles, no backpacks, no signs of a large group of 5 people passing through. None. Agent Marcel, it's important. Agent Marcel told you there's no rip crews in the past 10 years. No AR-15 rifles ever found in the past 10 years. And if this is being reported, that quote, he said it meant to him, he thought it meant, is this being brushed under the rug? Undocumented migrants, you heard testimony. Migrants, not drug dealers, not gun carrying, toting drug guys, but undocumented migrants coming here to the United States for a better life make up 98% of all apprehensions. 98%. They all wear camo because migrants also don't want to be detected. And they all carry backpacks with food and water. There's no mystery here. 0, because you have a backpack. None. Migrants use radios for pickups. When they come into the country, they're going to get picked up in a car to get transported. Yes, this is all arranged. We're not dummies here. We know how this works. But having a radio does not mean you're a drug dealer. Having a radio means you're communicating with someone so you can get picked up later on the side of the road. So you can be traveled to Tucson or Phoenix or wherever you're going. Defendant was reluctant to have the SO respond. In cartels, when they get involved, they make things messy. There's no single shot with a cartel. None. Daniel, the victim, an eyewitness. From Honduras, extreme poverty.
Counsel,
Yes,
we're
ma'am.
about due for, we think the jury's been in here since about 9 o'clock, so it's been about an hour and a half. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we have to take a recess. So we'll take a 20-minute recess. We'll be back here in about 10 to 11. We'll stand at recess until 10:50, 10 to 11.
Uh, I don't even know how to say this. I'm really struggling. There's a lot of information that he's twisting. I'm not getting it. I am so frustrated. Oh, my Amazon account has not been locked. I think I got a spam mail and wanting all my billing details and everything, and we can't do that. Oh, y'all. Okay, so what are y'all's opinions on this closing argument? I feel like it's just a copy of the original argument. I don't feel that this has. I don't know. I don't know. What bothers me is the conversation that they played that Mr. Kelly had with the 911 operator. He's an old man. He doesn't like to talk over the phone. It was stated that he was trying to be very careful and not say certain things because he did not know if the shooter who shot the guy was still out there. I can get that. I want to hear y'all's opinion. I know I've got some watchers. What do y'all think? Do you think that this is a good opening? I mean, a good closing? Do you think this is a good closing argument? What would you need to hear as a juror to sway you to their side? What would you need to hear? For me, I need the smoking gun, and I don't have a smoking gun. That's my big thing. Yes, he had the gun. They're making a big deal about how the gun was hanging on the back of the door with a shirt covering it. And they came in that day. My grandpa kept his guns that way. He had probably 20 rifles at some point. And there was always one hanging on the back of the door. And then when he got undressed at night, he'd hang his shirt over it. He had a little thing against the wall where he'd hang his gun belt, put the loop about his work pants or overalls that he wore over his clothes. Yeah, back then they wore those overalls. He'd hook that up there. So that was not an uncommon thing for me to see. Once again, though, I think most of these people in this area are of a ranching sort. So I don't think that's uncommon, but that doesn't mean he was hiding the gun. And, to be honest, if he shot somebody out there, if he called the Border Patrol agent before he fired his warning shots. If he really shot this person, he wouldn't have done that. I'm not trying to be tacky, but let's play devil's advocate here. If Mr. Kelly did shoot this guy, why would he call Border Patrol? There is enough property that he owns that if he would just leave that body there, not say anything, it would disappear. Sorry, I got to hear this. I'm going to mute for a second. I don't think you want to hear the squeal. I'm a volunteer firefighter. Shortness of breath. It's okay. I don't have to go. And thank you, baby girl. Good job. My dog alerts me to the sound. It would not take but days for that body to disappear out in that terrain with all the coyotes and I don't know how many wild feral hogs they have, but we have them. I know they have them. I just don't know to the numbers. The ranchers here, I know somebody who traps and removes hogs for a living, and he can do a couple hundred a month. So I'm just saying, Mr. Kelly really did viciously shoot this guy. Do you think he would call Border Patrol? I think not. I think not. I need some sound in the background. So I like out of once again, I've seen a lot of jury trials. I mean, I've watched a lot of trials. For me, the type of closing argument I like to see is when they put away the PowerPoint. I get it. It's a visual. It helps the timeline, which is great, but I want to see him speaking more from himself, I guess, for the lack of better terms. I'm just, his style of closing just doesn't get me to really jump up and down and go, yes, that was a good closing. But we'll see where it goes. We'll see. This afternoon, while we're doing jury watch, I have a surprise for y'all. Let me minimize this. Oops, didn't want to minimize it that much. I have a video I'm going to play of the said sheriff whom was on the stand yesterday, and he, oh my gosh, he said and did a lot of no things about this case. This sheriff was being interviewed. It's called Sheriff Serving and Living on the U.S./Mexico Border Tour, tour both sides of the U.S. and Mexico. And the tour is his house. He spends 5 minutes talking about the functioning of a grandfather clock. He's so proud of this grandfather clock. But he makes some very disparaging and very inappropriate comments. Then we're going to discuss, can a sheriff officer go to Mexico and question a witness without permission of Mexico? Back in, I think it was 2020, Mexico passed a new law concerning depositions and witness statements and whatnot. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to, here's another document that I'm going to read to you about taking depositions of witnesses, which is basically what he did. It's a informal deposition. So we are definitely going to go into that this afternoon, and then just kind of see where everything leads us. And we'll have to go from there. But I really don't think that we are going to have to wait another day for jury unless there's something that we're all missing. I've been I follow the recovery addict. I really like him. Recovery addict meaning not recovery from alcohol or drugs, just from gaming. And also he is a metal detector fanatic. And I really love I'm going to share this screen. I want you to see his tabs that he creates. He creates some amazing, not what I need. Hello. There we go. Let me put it up here. See this one right here? Look at that thumbnail. And he does this. And so everything you're talking about in the trial, you get in this thumbnail. And I did open it up. I'm going to go live. I'm going to get his comments because I want to open it up and show y'all. Here's the full thumbnail. Isn't it? I'm waiting for it to pop in on your side. Why is it not? I'm going to share the screen. Don't want to share that one. I want to share that. Look at his thumbnail. Oh my God. You see the barn? There's his boots. There's a metal detector looking for the weapon. There's the jugs of water, the horse that's rearing up, the illegal over here to the right where my little magnifier glass is with the white flag. I surrender, running back. There's a cow. There's the drones. There's the backpack. The ladder going over a fence. Here's the prosecution and the defense. I don't know I don't remember that one. There's a guy for his dogs. I guess this is the house. The gun that's covered up with a shirt. It's got real spicy in here. Let me double check. The length of football fields. I guess here are the illegals. There's the patrol cars. There's a radio. There's for deceased. I mean, really well done. As the crow flies, they've said that many times. But the spice meter, yeah, I got to figure out how to do that. But I need a very expensive piece of equipment first. So, I just think this is cute. I kind of want to copy him, but I don't want him to think I'm copying him. But I may do something similar to this for the next trial, especially the rust. I have gotten my rust image started. Now this is in July, so y'all, we got some time to go before I get going on that court. Let me see if I can pull it up. For the Alec Baldwin bands, add a background. For my Alec Baldwin, I've got 2 different ones. I've got that one. I think I like that one better. And then I've got this one. So let's look at those. We got time. So for the Alec Baldwin trial, I'm going to definitely coming on, and I will be using both of those in July. I'm having fun learning how to do all this. And the court is still not back yet. They're having their little break. Unfortunately, I can't fast forward through this. For those of you who don't know, Helena Hutchinson, was the film producer, director, cinematography director, who was shot by Alec Baldwin while practicing for a scene. And the bullet went through her and then lodged in the shoulder of the director, and she lost her life. But Alec Baldwin was given a gun by Hannah Gutierrez. That's either she handed it to him or she handed it to the director, but she said it was a cold gun when she handed it off. In her trial, she said she handed it to the director, but in reality, I really think it was handed to Mr. Baldwin from the rest of the testimony. Okay, while we're waiting, let's talk about taking a deposition or interviewing a witness in Mexico. If you are involved in a lawsuit or criminal charges in the United States of a witness in Mexico, it is important that you know under the law what you can and cannot do. According to the U.S. Department of State, first, provide there is no compulsion, use, voluntary depositions, I guess an interview of American witnesses can be conducted in Mexico irrespectively of the witness's nationality. Second, prior to permission from Mexico's Central Authority for the Hague Evidence Convention is required when deposing or questioning a Mexican and or other nationals in Mexico. Third, deposition on written questions or oral depositions may be taken on notice with U.S. Consular's office or provide an attorney from either the Mexican embassy, one from the United States consulate, or another location such as an office or hotel. Here's the big one. Prior arrangements must be made directly with the American embassy if the services of the U.S. consular offices are necessary to administer the oath of the witness, interpreter, and stenographer. He did none of those things. He should have had, even though he knows Spanish, should have had an interpreter because that's legally binding, and that they have an oath they take and it can be brought in as evidence into court. There has to be documentation, i.e. total recording, and there was none. Not only that, handling litigation matter in which some of the witnesses as well as the physical evidence are located outside the United States require that the attorney or government agency carefully consider all of the available options under the law for seeking and successfully obtaining the evidence needed for deposition. One of the things that also you cannot do is when you are doing anything in Mexico, you also have to share the information with Mexico. You can't just go in, talk to people, and get up and leave. You have to share the information. Um, oh, this is for other countries. So, what that sheriff did broke this agreement between Mexico and the U.S. big time. I don't understand where this sheriff got off doing that. I really don't. I think I'm going to go ahead for those of you who are on right now. Let's go ahead and play some of this video. Like I said, we will go back and play more this afternoon. I'm going to do this. Let's play the video.
Here and in Cochise County, which is to the east.
Awesome. Can you show us around?
Sure.
This is amazing property. How many acres does this sit on?
There's different parcels, you know, within the family, it adds up to a few thousand. That's our dog named Jill right there.
Hey there. Somebody. You all right?
Yeah, like I said, this house has been added on to over the years, so it's beyond what it was. It is my aunt and uncle's house. My uncle died recently, and so this is the original house where the family started out in. It's interesting to wind this thing like it has a little key. It's all mechanical. It's weights. Like you do this, and this weight here, watch, it'll go up. See it go up? And then as that weight falls down, I gotta start this again. As that weight
I'm sorry,
falls
y'all.
down,
You're there talking
it
about
operates the
Mexican
Mexican
border and you're talking about a
So it's like,
grandfather clock.
you know, all mechanical, no batteries or anything like that. It's just kind of neat how it works with these weights that maybe you wind it once every 5 days when the weight gets down low. You just crank it and then it goes back up. Just rocks that were picked up off the ranch to use to make that fireplace there. And it has a little greenhouse area over here. I'll show you.
They like their little birdie.
Like normally down here, you can't grow citrus trees because it's higher elevation than Phoenix.
I thought that it would possibly be warmer here.
You know, it seems illogical because you're going closer to the equator, right? So you
Mhm.
think you're going south, it ought to be hotter, but you're gaining elevation. So it's actually cooler. We get more rain. It's greener here.
Mhm.
Like the
Yeah.
water in the fish pond was frozen this morning, but
Was it?
it'll get up to maybe low 70s today, but it gets down to the 20s and 30s.
Okay.
At night. It's that big temperature swing because the air is thinner, higher elevation. So it gets cooler at night, but it warms up pretty quick. Usually down here, we have a good rainy season, better than Tucson or Phoenix. We usually get good rain from late June all the way up through halfway through September.
Mhm.
And so it greens up good, and it's good cattle country. Typically, there's plenty of grass for the cattle. Trees grow down here, and so, you know, a lot of mesquite trees here. And then some of our property up in the mountains, there's oak trees and pine trees and juniper trees. But yeah, it gets a lot more rain down here than it does up in Phoenix. So if you ever want to escape the heat, you come down here, and it's going to be in the summer like 15 degrees cooler than it is. Like it rarely gets 100 here in the summer.
That's awesome. So we're up a little bit.
Yeah, there's something on there, a grapefruit. So that, yeah, they actually grow. Now, if it wasn't indoors, it wouldn't grow here. Like in Phoenix, they would grow but it's just too cold down here. They would freeze and they would die. The citrus just can't stay alive here, but indoors like that, it does okay. If you're smelling the gingerbread in the air, that's what my wife's doing today. She's
Obviously,
cooking,
Christmas
making
time.
gingerbread houses, making the dough, laying it out, cutting out the little templates, and then baking the things. And then tomorrow, some cousins and some other lady friends are going to come over and make gingerbread houses with her.
Now, are all your children, are they all older adult?
We got one living at home, 16, but of the 9 children, they've all moved on. We always had the dream that
Dang.
all our kids would live near us, but life's not that way, you know.
Wow.
And there's
nice,
a
man.
pool room down here, a pool table.
Sheriff, this is a nice setup.
And then if you're up for it, before we start the border tour, I'm going to go throw some vegetables to the chickens. They're right out back in the chicken coop. You know, here's the garage in here.
It just goes on and on and on.
And then there's another bedroom suite here. This is like a fold down, like, I think they call these things like a Murphy bed. That's a fold down bed. And here's another bedroom suite in here.
Nice.
But anyway, I mean, it's mostly empty. It's just me and my wife and one of our sons for now. So there's like this an arbor thing. I think that's what they call it, where there's like an outdoor seating.
Okay, they're coming back in. Let's get back to this page.
See the proposed draft form?
I did, yes.
Okay, we don't have to talk. I just want to we'll talk about it later. Just want to make sure you have it. Right. Please be seated. In the record to show the presence of all the jurors, counsel, and the defendant. And as soon as you're ready, Mr. Jenny, you can continue with your closing.
Thank you, Your Honor. We left off with speaking about Daniel, the second victim and the eyewitness. What happened? What Daniel is not part of a drug organization. He's not. Doesn't work for the cartel. He's not. 6th grade education. He knew Gabriel for about a year. There's a picture of him in testimony. I'm talking about consistent statements. AK-47 shot, Red Horse. He also nailed it on how the victim died, clutching his chest, arm up. And that is the picture we see of Gabriel. They crossed, no weapons or drugs. No one in the group had weapons or drugs. No one. Returned to Mexico, and the shots were fired. These are 2 unarmed migrants heading back to Mexico. Shots coming from the defense property. It tells you shots were coming from the right-hand side, and the horse is saving his life. Heard 8 to 10 shots. There were 9 shell casings found. Consistency. And he is scared. Being shot at with an AK-47 is serious. Seeing your friend die in front of you is serious. Grabbed his chest and said, "I'm hit." Agent Heredia, first on scene at 2:40. No people, no tracks, looking for the defendant. Remember, this is an active shooter response. Saw no rifles, no backpacks, no drugs. And the defendant was calm. Kelly said, we met up with him. He said that 5 to 7 people were carrying bundles. He went from 5 people to 10 to 15, back down to 5 to 7. It never mentions, with Agent Heredia, never mentions he said he was shot at. never mentions he was shot at, never mentions he saw a weapon, never mentions a weapon was pointed at him. He's calm. Never mentions he even fired that weapon.
But he does mention he
10
was
minutes
in fear
after
of his
this
life
shootout
and the safety of
event.
his wife.
Unreal. Miss Kelly saw 5 armed men. Kelly went after them, heard 4 shots. Those are the 4 shots, 4 of the 9 shots by the defendant. The defendant said, "This baby is always by the door." That's an AK-47, which is behind the bedroom door, hanging up on a coat rack behind a sweatshirt.
Depends
That's the
on what
same
he's doing.
AK-47 that
He
he
comes in from
always
outside, he puts
keeps
a gun by the
by
front door.
the door.
This is not uncommon, and he
It
knows
says
it.
they were possibly carrying rifles. Officer asked, did the armed men shoot at him? Didn't know what direction they shot. Justification instructions. There's a litany of those in your packet. You got one for use of physical force, one for self-defense, one for use of deadly physical force, defense of a third person, and defense of premises. That's your homework. I'm going to tell you, cheat sheet is always a reasonable person standard. So when you see 2 unarmed migrants walking southbound beyond 2 fence lines, and you take your AK-47, you walk out and don't say a word, point it at them, and you shoot, would that be what a reasonable person would do in that situation? The answer has to be no. The answer has to be no.
No, it doesn't. He's lucky
No
I
evidence of
didn't.
any armed gunmen. No one found on BP footage. No foot traffic. No other shell casings. And they used a metal detector. I think they used up to 3 metal detectors on 2 different days. No other shell casings found. No one heard the mysterious shot, the made-up shot the defendant now claims started this entire event. He has to give you something. They got to give you something to justify why he shoots 9 times at a migrant. He has to give you something. It gives you this, quote, mysterious shot that even his wife does not hear. No evidence of drugs, guns, a struggle, a robbery, anything. And when the cartel gets involved, they leave things messy. They also don't leave evidence. No evidence of any rip crew in the area. And you heard Agent Marcel on the stand. Not in the past 10 years. Not in the past 10 years. No justification for stepping on your patio with an AK-47, not giving a warning, and shooting 9 times at 2 men who are southbound away from your property. No justification at all. Reasonable doubt? You got jury instruction on that? What I want to talk about is your common sense and experience. We're in this is a magical area we're in. This is what democracy is about, sitting in a jury, listening to a case, and determining the guilt and innocence of an individual. This is what our democracy is about. But you still use your common sense you use in everyday life. You still use it. I'm going to give you an analogy. I think the judge used the analogy for direct and circumstantial evidence with the rain outside. He told you if you didn't see it, you have no direct evidence of it. If you go outside, there's circumstantial evidence of rain. I want to use the same thing for reasonable doubt. We're sitting inside this courtroom, and you go outside, the facade's all wet, the pavement's all wet, people are carrying umbrellas. You were here all day long for the past 4 weeks, but you're here all day long. You don't hear it rain, You don't see it rain, you don't smell it rain, you don't smell anything. You don't smell the bushes and the wonderful odor, you don't smell any of that. However, is it beyond a reasonable doubt it rained? Yes. Is it possible that a truck came by, a fire truck came by and sprayed the facade and the ground? Yeah, possible. That's a ridiculous doubt. Use that same standard here. That same standard. There's no bandits out there threatening the defendant. None. Facts again, Gabriel and Daniel were shot at. Gabriel is dead. Killed by a high-powered weapon, an AK-47. Entry wound, right side, exit wound, chest, lines up perfectly with defendant's property. We're calling the wheat from the chaff here. Defendant's words, inconsistent. Defendant's words actually were consistent with some of the physical evidence. Shot 9 times. Eventually he says he shot 9 times. And now we have shell casings. Consistent there. And Daniel's words, always consistent with the physical evidence. Steps out, no verbal warning. Defendant shot his AK-47 9 times. Shell casings found.
I accidentally braided my earbuds from my hair, y'all. Not losing it, that's for sure.
Position and orientation of the body lines up with the defendant's home. I'm gonna ask you, we'll come back second time when we find him guilty of secondary murder. But you also can decide if you're not satisfied with secondary murder, you can consider manslaughter. If not satisfied with either secondary murder or manslaughter, you can consider negligent homicide. And find him guilty for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon against Daniel. I'm gonna leave you with this. Detective Ianza says in the interview, the moral of the story is you shot and someone is dead. And his answer is yes. That's all I have here.
Closing argument from the defense.
Oh my God, she's doing the closing? Oh, snap.
Okay. If I speak too quietly, just wave at me and I will do something about that, all right? So I just want to start off by telling you this about this case. And it's first in your jury instructions when you go back to review them. They're going to tell you don't guess. You're not supposed to make guesses about what happened in this case, and you're not even supposed to solve the mystery or discover all of the facts that were left out of this case. Don't guess. We have this very high standard in criminal cases. The standard here is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Not is this questionable, not is this suspicious, not even is this likely, not even is this really darned likely. The standard is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And I'm going to come back to that standard, but we have that standard for a reason. This is the most serious type of courtroom that we ever get in any kind of case in this country, is a criminal case. And for the most serious type of courtroom, we have the most serious standard of proof. And it's your job as jurors to hold the government to that standard of proof. We don't guess when we're dealing with criminal law. We don't guess when we're dealing with criminal charges. So please don't guess. I'm going to ask you to assess the facts of this case. We have two competing versions of events in this case. We have the state's idea, and the state says that Mr. Kelly walks out of his house one day with no provocation whatsoever. He takes aim at a great distance at people who are unarmed on his property, and he fires shots intending to hit those people. That's their version of events. Mr. Kelly and his wife tell something very, very different. And I'm going to talk about what they say happened here, but I want you to ask yourselves while I'm going through that, is what Mr. Kelly and his wife says consistent with the facts, the known facts of this case, the known evidence that has been presented to you? Not, is this consistent with somebody's subjective interpretation of somebody else's words? Those aren't facts. Those are guesses. I want to ask you if what Mr. Kelly said happened is consistent with the facts. And it is. The evidence has showed that Mr. Kelly comes from Montana with his wife, and they eventually settle here and they begin ranching. The evidence showed you in this case that they had a long time on this ranch before anything, happened. They've been here for decades. They are locals at this point. We heard from Wanda about the increased activity that took place on their property that we talked about in the opening statement. Wanda testified to that. You heard from Mr. Kelly about different instances where he was shot at. When he was interviewed by Detective Einza, he described those instances. We heard from Gary Wisdom, one of Mr. Kelly's neighbors who's in that same area, the same thing. When he originally started ranching there, he saw small family groups and didn't feel any danger. Gary Wisdom later says, eventually I started seeing bigger groups of men carrying weapons. And he called Border Patrol to report that at times. Border Patrol came out. He has no idea if they ever caught them or not. We heard from Border Patrol that this is a high trafficked area. There's a lot that comes through here. It's just north of that area where the wall ends. There are people who come through. There are drugs. There are vehicles. We heard from Border Patrol that it's impossible to distinguish nowadays really who's carrying drugs and who are just groups of migrants, because the drugs have gotten smaller as time has gone on. We have heard from Border Patrol that there are things that exist called rip crews. There are bandits. There are people who will rob migrant groups, who will kidnap migrants, who will steal drugs, and who will get into violent altercations with other people who are engaged in criminal activity in this area. That's not Mr. Kelly's imagination. That's what you heard from Border Patrol, who are out there every day on the ground dealing with what goes on out there. Border Patrol also talked about how there are a lot of unknowns. We know the cameras are not that effective. We know people know where to avoid detection. They know how to avoid detection. They know where our cameras are. So there's a lot that goes on that goes unseen and unknown by Border Patrol. They see signs of it, they know it's out there, but they're not able to respond and they're not able to make apprehensions all the time. This is what's going on in Mr. Kelly's life during the lead up to this incident on January 30th. The state talks about text messages that Mr. Kelly sends between himself and his friend, Gary Miller, a very close friend who he's known for a very long time. This is somebody who Mr. Kelly trusts and who understands where Mr. Kelly's coming from. Those messages come in that context. Those messages also come in the context of Mr. Kelly receiving continuously information from Jeremy Morcell, the Border Patrol Ranch Liaison. Jeremy Morcell is continuously communicating with Mr. Kelly about large groups on his property. They're nearby. Be careful. We're working a group of this size. It's in your area. It might come your way. They might be carrying narcotics. Narcotics trafficking has picked up around Keno Springs. This is the communication that Mr. Kelly is receiving on a regular basis from Border Patrol. Border Patrol knows what they're talking about. Mr. Kelly relies on that information. The level of fear and concern that Mr. Kelly experiences on his own property is increasing as a result. He chooses to arm himself in case he ever has to defend himself. And he expresses that to his friend, Gary Miller. He talks about the fear. He talks about what's happening on his property. He does it in an over-exaggerated way to help him blow off some steam, to help him feel a little bit better, and to help assuage some of the concerns that he has, because he never knows when something is going to happen. And ultimately, something does happen on January 30th of 2023. Mr. Kelly is in his kitchen eating lunch. It's a day like any other. He's been out about on his ranch. He's planning to do some more chores for the rest of the day. He has no idea that he's about to be in a life or death situation. He doesn't ask for it. He's minding his own business in his own house, when suddenly he sees something. He sees people carrying rifles, carrying backpacks out the kitchen window. He does the right thing. He calls law enforcement. He is not some sort of vigilante who decides he's going to take matters completely into his own hands. He calls for help. He calls the guy who has the badge and the gun. He calls Jeremy Morcell. And he tells him, I hear a shot or there's shooting. I might have to return fire. Immediately, he tells law enforcement that he may have to fire. When he's walking outside, he has heard a shot. This is not a mystery shot, as the state describes. This is a real shot. Mr. Kelly hears it, and the whole situation completely changes in that moment. A gunshot outside of your home is not something you hear every day. And it's not something you hear in the same context with people running with rifles and backpacks across your property. This is a frightening, scary situation. And in frightening, scary situations, people flee, people freeze, or people act. And Mr. Kelly acted. He is being confronted on his own property, in his own house, with criminal activity involving guns in his yard. And he doesn't know what's going to happen next. He knows he needs help, so he calls Border Patrol. But he doesn't know how long it's going to take them to get there. And he doesn't know what these people are going to do in the meantime. The state would have you believe that you have to stay in your house in a situation like that. You do not. The law does not require that you stay inside of your house. In fact, that is not the smart thing to do. Mr. Kelly, when he walks outside with his rifle, his intention is to stop this threat. His intention is to make these people go away. Because if you stay inside your house, you don't know what they are going to do. They're going this direction right now, but after you lose sight of them, who knows where they're going to go? Who knows what they're going to do? This isn't a conscious thought process that Mr. Kelly went through at this time either. This was a split-second decision. He sees a threat, he responds to the threat. Mr. Kelly is the man of his house. His wife is there. He needs to protect himself, and he needs to protect his wife, just like every man should do. And he is 100% justified in walking outside to meet this threat. When he walks outside, he sees people. He sees that they are carrying rifles. He walks out onto his porch. The metal door bangs behind him. It makes a noise. The person in front looks at him and points his rifle at him. Mr. Kelly tells this to Detective Einstein, points his rifle at me. Under those circumstances, Mr. Kelly is 100% justified in firing his weapon at that person. He doesn't need to fire warning shots. He is justified in firing at that person in that moment. Again, split-second decision. Mr. Kelly doesn't think, now I'm going to fire some warning shots in the hopes that I will have to avoid doing something else. There is no thought process. This is an immediate life or death scenario. It's an immediate decision that Mr. Kelly makes, and he chooses to not take that shot. He chooses not to fire at that person. Instead, he raises his rifle up above the tree in front of him. And you all have seen the tree. You've been to the patio. You know what this looks like. He raises it up. He fires warning shots. The state said he could have emptied this magazine. He doesn't. He stops shooting because these people start to run away. He has some more conversations with Agent Morcell about this. These folks are going somewhere. They're gone. The threat is over. He goes out to check on his barn, and he encounters Border Patrol. He has already told Agent Morcell that he was going to fire shots. As far as Mr. Kelly knows, Agent Morcell has passed on that information to everybody else who's responding. He is not required to tell every single law enforcement member every single thing that happened to him that day. He assumes that they already know because he already reported it, and that is why they're there. During this encounter, sheriff's deputies have some communication with Mr. Kelly. They have some communication with Alan, Mr. Kelly, and they start to search this area east of the house. You heard testimony from these deputies. They're searching this area east of the house. Border Patrol is traveling south. Everybody says we're looking for Mr. Kelly, and Wanda said that he went south. And yet the sheriff's department are searching east of the house. Why are they searching east of the house? They say they're just looking for Mr. Kelly. It's because Wanda told them this is where we saw those people. And so they're searching east of the house to try to find evidence of the folks who Mr. and Mrs. Kelly described. They comb through that area. They go over the two fences. They spread out. They're looking for people. They're looking for weapons. They're looking for people who might be injured or who might be hiding. And they don't find anybody. They don't find anybody. Ultimately, they come back and they talk to Mr. Kelly and his wife. And Mr. Kelly and his wife say, this is the area where we saw people. Mr. Kelly tells them, I heard a shot. He hears a shot and he sees people running with backpacks and rifles. And law enforcement chooses not to go and look again. They don't think it's important. They don't think it's worth it to try to go see if they can find something else now that they have more information. They don't sit down with Mrs. Kelly. They don't tell her, slow down a minute. Let's walk through this one step at a time. Tell me what you saw. Tell me what you did. Tell me where you were. They don't do that with Mr. Kelly either. They don't bother to slow down and get the information. They describe Wanda as being upset. Castaneda, Deputy Castaneda, who talked to Wanda, said she seemed upset. She seemed confused. She was distraught by what was happening. And yet, nobody took the time to ask her to take a breath, to slow down. Let's talk through this. Same thing with Mr. Kelly. He's just had this encounter. Imagine you're sitting in your kitchen and you hear a shot and you see what's happening and all this happens. Your adrenaline goes up. Your whole body is on alert when something like this happens. And when law enforcement gets there, it's still sort of coming down. It's still kind of washing out of you. Under those circumstances, people can't be expected. People who are victims of crimes, like Mr. and Mrs. Kelly were that day, they can't be expected to fully and clearly, from beginning to end, articulate to law enforcement exactly what happened. Law enforcement is trained to deal with that. Law enforcement should recognize that and talk to someone. Talk me through it slowly. That's all they had to do. Nobody did that. And now the fact that Mr. Kelly made some omissions because he's in that state of fear and agitation and adrenaline and excitement, that's being held against him. And that shouldn't be held against him. That should be held against the officers who didn't properly recognize the situation, who didn't ask questions of witnesses. You heard the state argue this was an emergency call, lights and sirens, active shooter. Law enforcement was on high alert when they came to the scene. They had their rifles out. And yet they failed to recognize that Mr. and Mrs. Kelly might be in a state of emotional agitation, to put it mildly. They don't recognize that. They don't do a slow walk through of the information. They don't take their time. They don't even go do another search. And now we are left with questions. We do not know if Gabriel Cuen Buitimea's body was there when law enforcement arrived. It's a question that's outstanding. We don't know the answer to it, and now we never will. Ultimately, law enforcement leaves, and later in the evening, Alan finds this body on his property. This is the second time this day that things have gone from normal and regular to high anxiety, high stress, extreme situation happening here. I've never discovered a dead body on my property. You folks probably haven't either. But who's to say how any of us is going to react when we come upon something like that? How are we supposed to feel? What are we supposed to think? What is an appropriate response to finding a dead person on your property? And imagine what must be going through this man's head. He knows what happened earlier. He knows what he saw. He knows what he did. He knows he fired shots up over the tree in front of his patio, and now he's stumbling upon a person, and he doesn't know what happened. He's a smart man, and he can put two and two together. And any intelligent person who's in his situation, imagine being in a situation where you fired shots and you know you didn't shoot this person, but you know you fired shots. That is scary. Anybody in Alan's shoes is going to be thinking, oh my Lord, what are they going to think when I call this in? It's a terrifying scenario for Alan. What would a guilty person do? What would someone do who's come across this body and who thinks, I probably shot this guy? What would a guilty person do in Alan's shoes? Someone with a huge, expansive property, someone who knows law enforcement was already here and they left, someone who knows that's where I was standing when I fired these shots. A guilty person had every opportunity to cover this up, and he would have been able to do so effectively. He could have disposed of the weapon. He could have picked up the shell casings. He even could have disposed of the body on this property. He didn't even need to do that. He could have just picked up the weapon, hid it, buried it somewhere, buried the shell casing somewhere, and never made a phone call and just left on a trip for a while. That's all he had to do. That's all a guilty person had to do. That's not what Alan did. Alan, even though he's standing there and even though he knows this looks bad, I don't know what's going to happen, he does the right thing. He does the right thing because it's the right thing. You can tell when he's having these phone calls. In the state, they pull up some excerpts and they read them in their tone of voice. I encourage you to review these phone calls and listen to Alan's tone of voice. Listen to his demeanor, hear what he's saying. Is this a person who knows that he's guilty and is trying to cover things up, but nevertheless is calling law enforcement, which is what the state wants you to think? Or is this a person who is completely scared and shell-shocked because he knows he didn't do this, but he knows that calling it in is the right thing to do? And he trusts that law enforcement is going to do the right thing. He trusts that they are going to listen to him. And so he calls it in. He calls the Border Patrol, the guy with the badge and the gun, the guy who he called earlier, the same guy who sent all the deputies out earlier and who sent Border Patrol out earlier. There's no possibility that Alan thinks the Border Patrol is going to sweep this under the rug. No possibility whatsoever that he thinks that. He's still in a distraught state. He still doesn't know how he feels. He's still communicating in a vague way to Agent Morcell because he is in shock. What's the appropriate response when you find a dead body on your property? Can anyone say, here's how you're supposed to act, and if you act differently, then that's wrong? People act in all sorts of ways when confronted with shocking and frightening scenarios. And Alan couldn't form the words. He called for help and he tried. He tried to communicate what he was finding, and he did. You cannot listen to these phone calls with, well, there aren't phone calls recorded with Border Patrol, unfortunately. You can't listen to the phone call that Alan has with the Sheriff's Department and conclude that he's not communicating that there is a dead body on his property. He makes it very clear with the words that he can call to mind in that moment, which is a terrible moment for Mr. Kelly. There's a lot made about the phrase animal, or the use of the word animal. Agent Morcell testified that he used that word first. He asked Mr. Kelly, "What is it, Mr. Kelly? You're not telling me what's going on. Is there an animal?" And Mr. Kelly responded to him and said, "Well, as opposed to a vegetable or a mineral, if you know what I mean." He's clear. He's making himself clear. And then he does the same thing when he's on the phone call with the Sheriff's Department. Something that else goes to Mr. Kelly's mind when he's talking with the Sheriff's Department is the Sheriff's Department dispatcher tells him, "You said you shot something." The dispatcher tells that to Mr. Kelly when he has never said anything like that. Again, imagine, how must somebody feel knowing I fired shots earlier, I know I didn't hit this person, here's a dead body, oh, I'm afraid to call this in, but I have to call it in. And then when dispatch talks to him, dispatch says, "You said you shot something." That is terrifying. That is a terrifying mistake that dispatch made, and it's terrifying for Alan to hear that. That's all in his mind when law enforcement is responding to his property. That's also all in the minds of all of the law enforcement personnel who are going to this property. They are being told incorrectly that Alan stated he struck something or he shot something, when Alan never made that statement. And it's nobody's fault. Alan's on the phone with Agent Morcell. Agent Morcell is on the phone with Agent Tercy. Agent Tercy is relaying that to Agent Layugan. Agent Layugan is relaying that out to the Sheriff's Department. So you have all of these layers of telephone. And of course, things get lost in translation. It's not necessarily anybody's fault, but it is a crucial defining factor in this case. The investigators go out there already believing that this guy has confessed. They already have their suspect before they arrive at the scene. When they're at the scene, Lopez, the first person who comes out, he talks to Alan. He finally records a conversation. And his recording shows that his report was wrong. This is a theme that comes up repeatedly in this case. Law enforcement documents statements, especially Alan's statements, especially Wanda's statements, incorrectly. We have 2 reports from the first call from 2 different officers who both at the same time talked to Mrs. Kelly, and they both say that she said 2 completely different things. None of these conversations are recorded. Documentation is unreliable. The conversations between Mr. Kelly and Agent Morcell, not recorded, unreliable documentation.
Yep.
Finally, when we have a recording, it's Lopez, first person on the scene, he records him. And Lopez documents that conversation incorrectly in his report as well. According to Lopez's report, he says to Mr. Kelly, "Do you know if you shot him?" And Mr. Kelly says, "I have no idea." That sounds pretty bad. Sounds like Mr. Kelly's admitting he might have shot this person. That is not what Mr. Kelly said. When you listen to Lopez's recording, the recording says, "Do you know who shot him?" And Mr. Kelly says, "I have no idea." Very, very different. The documentation of the statements made in this case is really concerning to anybody who's worried about law enforcement being objective. You have Omar Rodriguez, who gets out and stands near the body. He's looking at the body. He's got this in his mind, and he speculates about the angle of the shot, the same way that you heard the state speculate in their argument to you about the angle of the shot. He says this shot comes in here, goes out here. There's the house over there. Aha! The shot must have come from there. That's not what any of the experts say. The experts say you have no idea, based on this evidence, where this shot came from. We're going to get to them in a minute, but the initial investigators feel very free to speculate. You have Sergeant Flores, who takes photographs of the body. There's no note that the backpack is unzipped. Nobody raises that as an issue in any reports. Nobody
That's
raises
huge.
the issue about how the backpack's pulled up over this person's head.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody raises the issue about how the fanny pack buckle is broken and the fanny pack is lying next to this person. There are photographs, we can see those things, but nobody seemed concerned about that. Nobody seemed to think maybe there are other crimes that have taken place here besides the obvious crime of this person's been shot. Nobody ever considered that there was any other evidence of any other crimes.
Nobody
Sergeant
considered
Flores, on the
why
other hand,
was he shot
specifically said,
outside of
"No, I
Mr.
didn't see
Kelly."
any evidence of any crime. None." Amazing. It's amazing.
I like her.
Thinks more about the emotional aspect of this. These are human beings. Alan's a human being. Wanda's a human being. We're not robots. We all react differently in different situations. Alan's on scene.
Humanized.
Nobody's talked to him. Still, nobody's asked him, "Walk me through what happened. Show me where you were." Nobody does that. And then they put handcuffs on him. And they put him into a police car. Imagine what he must be thinking in that moment. Imagine just that feeling of, oh my gosh, this is really real now. They're taking me away in handcuffs from my house. I don't know if I'm coming back. That's an unbelievable moment for anybody to have to go through. Imagine Wanda. She's been sitting in the back of a police car. They don't ask her what happened. They don't walk her through the scene. They don't ask her anything. They put her in the back of a police car. Wanda, a person who has obviously never done anything wrong, who's obviously the victim of a crime. They put her in a police car. They take her to the station. That's an arrest. They arrest Wanda. You don't have any reason to do that. And right before they drive away with her, she sees her husband walking past the car in handcuffs. How does she feel when she's being taken to this interview? How does Alan feel when he's being taken to this interview? Would it be reasonable to be scared? Of course it would be. Would it be reasonable to be really concerned now? Maybe I don't really trust these investigators. I'm in handcuffs when I called them. That's a big concern. This is what's going on emotionally when Alan and Wanda are interviewed by law enforcement. And again, there's no slow walkthrough. There's no show me on a map where this is. What did you do? Describe this to me. Wait, let me back you up a little bit. Tell me more about this. They don't do any of that. There's browbeating. There's tactics used to try to scare this man into confessing. Detective Einstein tells him, you shot this person. That's pretty scary, especially if you know you didn't shoot this person. There's, we're going to find that rifle and we're going to do ballistics. By the way, what's Alan's response to that? He says, you don't need a search warrant. I will show you where the rifle is. I will show you where the rifle is. This rifle that's supposedly not in its proper place, according to these guys. Alan says, I will show you where this rifle is. Detective Einstein says, no. Fair enough.
That's on them.
Okay.
Too bad.
Then
There's
we get
nothing
to
wrong
the
with having your rifle
significant
hanging on your
issues
back door with your
of
shirt that you
words
took off at the
being
night before.
changed. And this starts
I'll
with
say it 100
Alan.
times. That's how my grandpa did it.
He's in this interview with Detective
Didn't hide it.
Einstein, and watch it.
Hiding
Don't
it was
pick out
putting
a
it
line
putting it
here
under
and
the
there. Watch
or in the
it.
cushion,
You have the whole
burying
interview.
it.
Look at the whole thing beginning to end. Listen to the context. Listen to the tone of voice, the body language. It's a whole. Don't pick out a line and decide what it says. Watch it. Repeatedly, Detective Einstein says, you shot this person. You shot at these people. Alan says, no, I never did that. The state talked about a part in that interview where he was asked, did you shoot? And he doesn't answer. Watch the interview. Detective Barba asks him, did you shoot? Alan pauses, and then Detective Einstein jumps in with a different question, and Alan answers that question. He never denies having shot his rifle, ever. He's asked, he says, yes, I shot this rifle. I shot it up. I shot it over. Detective Einstein says, at, over, same thing. Alan says, no, it's not the same thing. It's a different thing. And there's back and forth about that a lot. Alan obviously thinks at and over are two different things. Alan also repeatedly says, I never chased anybody. I never went after anybody. I don't know where you're getting that. Watch the interview. It's there. In spite of this, law enforcement essentially fabricates a confession. They write down on the booking form. That booking form is their statement of probable cause. Here's what happened. Subject, he was chasing people. He shot. He admitted he shot at multiple subjects. That was not true. Alan never said that. Law enforcement wasn't listening, and they didn't care. They already decided that he was guilty, and they were perfectly fine inventing words for him, words that were the opposite of what he said and putting those down as if he said them. There's a lot made about Wanda. The treatment of Wanda in this case was just disgraceful. They're trying to say that she's lying to protect her husband. She said 5 and then she said 2. They come up with these extremely nitpicked, not recorded, supposed inconsistent statements to say that she's lying. I would just submit to you that if Wanda were lying about what happened in this case, all she would have to do would be to say, I saw these guys, he pointed a rifle at my husband. That's all she would have to say. She didn't say that because she didn't see. But if she wanted to lie about something to protect Alan, very easy for her to do. That's all she would have to say, and nobody could contradict her. She didn't do it. So confirmation bias is a big thing that runs through this case, and it's the tendency to interpret new information and new evidence to confirm pre-existing beliefs and conclusions. And that plays a very big role in this case too. They do this interview with Alan. They don't listen to the words he says. They make up new words and they arrest him. They don't wait until they can do ballistics. They don't wait until maybe they can find some witnesses. They don't wait until they can do forensic testing or any drone footage or anything. They don't wait. They just go straight for this guy. And every single thing that they do after that, they design to confirm the decision that they've already made. It's natural. Human beings, we like to confirm that we're right. It's really uncomfortable to say I might have made a mistake. Maybe I was wrong. And so when they get a phone call from somebody calling himself Miguel, who says he's related to the family, they don't question it. And then when it turns out that that's false, well, oh well. They're not concerned that people are coming forward making false statements about this case, even though apparently they've talked about it, I don't know. But it doesn't bother them. Then there's this person, Ramon, and he says something different. He comes forward under different circumstances too. Does anybody bother to analyze his statements? Does anybody bother to compare his statements against Miguel's statements or Mr. Kelly's statements? Does anybody bother to compare Ramon's statements to the physical evidence in this case? No, of course not. They don't need to. They have their guy. They have their conclusion. Then we get to Daniel. The state says he makes consistent statements. And remember, if you're inconsistent, that means you might be lying about something. Well, Daniel doesn't even tell investigators what his name is in this case. He comes forward under very suspicious circumstances. He comes forward after this has all been out, after they know that Mr. Kelly's been arrested. His picture's been all over the place. Their version of events is out there for anyone to read, for anybody to think about, for anybody to make something up about. And here comes Daniel. And he lies about his name because he doesn't want to get deported back to Honduras. And he lies about his criminal history. He's asked, have you ever smuggled drugs in the United States? He says no. That is not true. He's telling a lie. The state says he's not associated with any criminal organization. He's not a drug smuggler. Daniel says, I'm not a drug smuggler. Well, except for when he is, because he took a plea in federal court under oath to smuggling drugs. Lied about his name to federal court also, by the way. You hear from law enforcement that you can't just accept a statement as the truth just because it's a statement. You have to test its credibility. You have to see if it matches up with other statements, with physical evidence, with known facts of the case, with forensic evidence. And that's how you can assess the reliability of a witness statement. I'm not going to get the whiteboard out again. You guys have seen me do it already, but you've got a body found 115 yards east of Mr. Kelly's house. You've got that body lying face down. You've got Daniel stating, we were 10 meters away from the house. We were to the west of the house. We were facing the border wall. Border wall is 2 football fields away. The shots were coming from over there away from the house. That is impossible to believe. It could not have happened that way. We know for a fact, we're not guessing. We know for a fact that it did not happen the way that Daniel said that it happened. We know for a fact that Daniel previously told investigators he was 15 meters away from the border wall when this happened. We know that for a fact. State says he's consistent. How is that consistent? It's not. We know for a fact that Daniel claims he gets right up to that road that goes by the border wall where the pines are. I look back, I saw the person. We know that for a fact. We know that that is impossible. You all have been out there. You know what the end of the wall looks like. You know what this road looks like. That is impossible. We are not guessing about that. That is a fact. We know that the body's not on the west side of the house. Fact. We know that the body is not 10 yards away from the house. Fact. We know that there is no Border Patrol road that goes through this property that goes directly to the end of the wall, like Daniel said it did. Fact. We know he is wrong. What does that mean? It means he wasn't there. It means he is telling a story. Why? We don't know. But you can't be there and get it this wrong. It is not possible. I don't care if you have a 6th grade education. My kid has a 3rd grade education, and she can describe a place. It's not that hard. Nobody questions this either. Forget what Daniel says for a minute and how obviously false and concerning that is. What is wrong with the investigators in this case? Raul Rodriguez interviews Daniel, and he says things that Raul Rodriguez, Detective Rodriguez, admits these are not making sense. Instead of pursuing that, for example, he says this took place west of Nogales. No, it didn't. We know that for a fact. It took place east of Nogales. Instead of pursuing that as a possible problem, as a possible, maybe this person's not so credible. Maybe they have another motive for coming forward. Law enforcement doesn't bother asking any questions. Instead, they provide explanations. They provide help. They provide suggestion. They say, well, are you sure you were that close? That sounds pretty close. Are you sure? Well, maybe you don't know because you were running and maybe you were scared, and so you didn't really know where you were, right? They make suggestive statements to this witness in an interview when really they should be suspicious about this and they should do some detective work to find out what the truth is, not to bolster what they've already decided they want the truth to be. That's not how an investigation should work. And let's remember, Daniel first comes forward because the sheriff goes into...
That's not on me, y'all. Oh no, we're not going to start having these problems. Come on.
Why is the sheriff going into Mexico? Why? He doesn't wear a uniform because if you wear your uniform in Mexico, they get picky about that. That's what he said.
And he didn't want to draw
That's why they use
attention
him
to
as
the fact that he was illegally interviewing a witness
And then they don't record this interview, and then they record
in a
part of
U.S.
it, and
law.
they've got no good reason for why they did that. That is sketchy. And that sets the tone for this whole investigation.
Yeah,
So
thank.
that's some of the facts, that's some of the evidence that you've heard from this witness. Let's talk about the forensics. The medical examiner's report essentially says there's no way to determine the time of death. This is a very significant fact in this case. What was the time of death? Because if his body wasn't there when the sheriff's department searched this area, then Alan has nothing to do with this. We have evidence that Omar Rodriguez examined the body. He says the torso is still warm. This is significant information. He could have passed that on to a medical examiner to get some sort of scientific determination of time of death. Didn't do that. They put the body in a cooler. They destroy any possibility of accurately determining a time of death scientifically. And the medical examiner's report proves that a gunshot wound is the cause of death. It doesn't prove which gun, doesn't prove which type of gun, doesn't prove which type of ammunition, doesn't prove even long gun or handgun, doesn't prove anything other than gunshot wound. Okay, great. The ballistics. Let's talk about that. See what can be proved in this case, what they did prove forensically. They talk about this as a long-range shot. I recall the ballistics experts testifying that what that means is this shot was fired from a distance of 6 feet away or further. That's a long-range shot. So they've proven that this shot was taken from 6 feet away or further. Anything in between is a guess, and we are not supposed to guess. The ballistics, obviously there's no bullet, so they can't prove which weapon this came from. They can't prove which type of weapon this came from. They can't prove, again, which type of ammunition this came from. The shell casings, we heard testimony about shell casings that are found on the patio. They can't prove which direction the shooter was pointing. You make a circle around the shell casing. The shooter could be standing anywhere in that circle. They can't prove if the shooter was pointing straight or up or something else. Interestingly, the ballistics experts testified that had they been told that there was a possibility that this rifle was shot in an upward direction, they could have done testing on the shell casing pattern. And they might have been able to come to a conclusion about that. Yes, it was pointing up, or no, or it's inconclusive. But they didn't do the test because they were never asked to by the state. The investigators in this case never tested their own theory. They never considered that what Alan said might actually be supported by some evidence, and maybe we should look for that evidence too, not just evidence that shows that he's guilty. They didn't do that. And now we'll never know. Imagine if this were a sexual assault case and there was DNA of the perpetrator involved. And the investigators said, well, we could test that DNA, but it'll probably be inconclusive, so we're not going to test it. That's outrageous. That is outrageous. We have a right to expect that people who are investigating people for serious crimes are going to examine and test every piece of evidence that they can, even if it might not tell them something. What if it could? What if they did that test? What if it showed that an expert could say this rifle was pointed in an upward direction? It could do that. We would want to know that, wouldn't we? Before we decide what happened in this case. They didn't do it. The ballistics also, you've got this field of obstacles in between the porch and where this body is eventually located. You've seen the photographs, you've been to the scene, you know how many things are in between there. What I didn't hear the state address is the problem of the point of aim and the point of impact for this rifle. I'm not going to rehash all of that, but ballistics experts said that if that entry wound, and this is assuming the person's just standing there, we have no idea where this person was when he was shot. The ballistics experts testified that they could not possibly determine that based on the evidence that they saw. But the point of impact on this person was about 4 feet off the ground, which according to the experts means Alan would have to been aiming, if he took the shot, at a spot that's about 3 feet off the ground, which means he's aiming down. And you saw everything that was in the way. You saw the smoker, the pergola, the patio, the table and the chairs that's on there that's made out of cement. If he were firing in that manner, there would be evidence. Mm-hmm. The fact that there's no evidence of any bullet impacting anything in that entire field is evidence that supports what Alan said happened. If he fired where he said he fired, of course you don't expect to see bullet evidence in that field of obstacles, and you don't. The physical ballistics evidence is consistent with what Mr. Kelly said happened in this case.
Yep.
It's about 5 to noon. I think it's appropriate. It looks like you moving into a new area, so it's a good time to break. We'll take our noon recess. Same routine as we've been following all week long. We'll take a noon recess and go out to lunch. Please be back in the jury room at 1:30, at which time the defense will continue with this closing argument. We're in recess until 1:30 in the afternoon.
So we have an hour and a half, which will make it 3:30 our time. I would love to hear from you guys and what your opinions are. There's a comment button. Please click it. I'd appreciate it. Leave some comments. Mary, where's the water? When you live in the country, you must have access to. Wait a minute. Where's the water? When you live in the country, you must have access to a gun for many reasons. He's an older man. His vision to shoot a person at that distance is absurd. Yeah, that's some of the arguments that has been said is that his vision isn't as good as it used to be, blah, blah, blah. But the biggest thing for me is all the debris between. I mean, I really struggle with history. I really struggle with the whole gun situation. They found none of the bullets he fired. They found nothing except for casings. Well, let's talk about the gun. I don't know how many of y'all shot guns, but I have. I'm going to go to the gun range this weekend. But when you have a rifle and you're shooting up in the air and it's ejecting to the right, it's ejecting from this angle. Sometimes it throws forward, sometimes it throws a little back, sometimes it may throw directly to the side. But the whole point is when you have the rifle pointed straight ahead and the casings are shot out, it's going to land differently. What I don't understand is none of the expert witnesses went to the scene of the crime. Sorry about that. None of them went to the scene. They're taking everything off of the drone and picture footage and video. One guy fired the weapon just to make sure that it was firing straight and didn't yaw too far to the right or left, and was also seeing how it was ejecting. But he said he couldn't do it up in the air because that would then make it unsafe, and because you don't know where the bullets are going to land, there's no control, so he couldn't do that. I like the fact that, remember I said the prosecution's closing arguments I didn't like a whole lot because it was relied on by a lot of PowerPoint, and I felt like we were in class. But that's his style. I prefer this young lady's style. I shouldn't have eaten all that food. I've been snacking all morning. So I want to get back to this video that I was sharing with you. Let's watch a little bit of that while we're on break. It's a perfect time to do that. And let's get it going. I want to do that because I want you to hear. And this is part of this is, and I'm not playing this for giggles and grins. This is important. I don't care about the guy's house. I think it's kind of meh. But I want you to hear what he said when he starts talking about the illegals in this
And
place.
it's got those vines growing over it and stuff, so you can kind of go out there in the summer. And it has one of those misting things where
Horrible photography. Going
You
through
didn't grow up in this house.
no, my mom's house is just down the road from here.
oh, the blinds
And
are
my
even
dad's
have
passed away now, and she's just there by
a
herself.
blue
That's the house I
material to
grew
the
up.
blinds.
But this was
Oh, that's
my
so
uncle's
80s.
house, and my dad when he grew up. Before that, it was my grandpa's house originally.
And that's
Oh.
so unique that you grew up like this. You guys are 5 generations
Yeah.
here, and all your family lived on this property.
Quite a few of them, and quite a few have moved away, Tucson, Phoenix, and whatnot. But my uncle still lives next door.
This is
My
the
mom's
sheriff
down the
that
road.
testified,
My
who's now
son has a house
retired.
next door here. And
Multiple
like I said,
higher ups
the kids
retired
stay
after
around,
the
but it
case.
looks like, maybe there's not too many work opportunities down here. So
Yeah.
they meet people and get married.
You know how kids are, how we are. You grow up and I'm getting away from here, or whatever the
Exactly.
case.
Well, like when I grew up here, me and my wife went to public school together, and I met her when she was 10 years old and I was 12 years old. Like right now, I'm 64 and she's 62. But back then, it's right. Everybody's like, man, I'm going to get out of this dirt water town. I'm going to go make something out of myself. But then later on, people realize, you know what? The weather's pretty nice here. the people are calm, and it's peaceful. And then a lot of people move back later on, but as far
I
as
look
like
at that old
jobs and stuff,
TV.
it's not like Phoenix where there's more job
Y'all.
opportunities.
Yeah. Once they get older, they're gonna get away from the rat race and all the big city crap. They're gonna bring the kids back.
Yep. They're going to get tired of that
Yeah.
$2,700 apartment and just think, you know what? The way I grew up out on the ranch, a lot of open space, peaceful,
Nice
calm.
portrait
Take a
of
walk in the evening.
grandma.
I think at some point that'll click.
They
Yeah.
kick in. They kick in.
And these little crocheted animals, my wife makes those. She's made tons of them. Like I have a whole collection. Like that's a llama, and that's a little.
There's the
donkey
wife
with
that
the
just
pack
ran and
saddle.
hid.
I'm amazed how she does it. I look at like the fine little stitches, and I think there's no way I could make a straight line like that and have it all come out good. She just does it all.
Oh, I want
Yeah, she
those.
definitely
Those are
took it
cute
to the
little
next level. Now,
llamas.
you were saying that you still feed chickens.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of relaxing for me to do the ranch type stuff. I like going and cutting firewood and just working on the wells and the pipelines and things like that, fixing the fences or like cutting firewood,
Aw.
chainsaw and stuff like that. So that's actually
Yeah, just
very
wait.
relaxing for me to do the ranch stuff. Go
Wait
feed
till
the
he starts
chickens and
talking
stuff.
about our defendant.
Playroom for the kids back here doesn't really get used because there's
Oh, that's cool.
not the young people around. But this house is mainly empty, just me and my wife and our 16-year-old son. But there's a lot of people that have lived here over the years, and just
A big house for 3
A lot
people.
of family.
Yep, there are
It
various
is a ranch house.
bedrooms. Like here's, I think this back hallway has maybe 4 or 5 bedrooms.
God,
This place
look
is
at the blinds with the
You just
material
help
that matches.
adding on to
So
it.
80s.
Well, this was my uncle's house, and then he passed away. So
How many
moved
kids
on.
did he have?
5.
Are you Mormon?
No, there are Mormons in this area, and probably up where you are too. But no, I don't know if Karen's making food for us or something. Some food appeared here.
Oh, that's so typical ranch hamburger
She
for
says,
lunch.
"Do you want a cheeseburger?"
Sure, I'll take a cheeseburger. You guys like all organic
No,
kind of folks? Like
No.
you don't process your own cattle and all that deal?
not now. We maybe would be if I wasn't the sheriff, but I'm just
I love how she's dressed. She reminds me of my
busy on
grandma.
that now. Maybe we go back to
Oh my
that
God,
when
she'd have the little
I'm done
pants,
doing
and
the
then she'd
sheriff's
have a little
stuff, 'cause
skirt,
just,
and then she'd have a long shirt,
it's too
then
much to
she'd have an
focus on all
apron.
the animals and stuff.
Oh
There's
my
all the
God,
chickens out there, and then
this is
we get
memory.
here in Nogales all this free fruits and vegetables because over half of the fruits and vegetables that come into the U.S. come in through this town, and there's always a lot of free stuff, and they like to give it away rather than throw it away when they have excess. So you'll see when I open the garage door here. This is right now, we just use it for chickens, which kind of feels like a waste, but if we don't get it, they just throw it in the dump. Like you see, I got all these cases of watermelons, and then and that's honeydew, and we had a bunch of cantaloupe. These are all green beans.
God, look at the green beans.
And like I say, the produce companies, they get excess and they try to time it for the market so it's ripe when it gets to New York or wherever it's going. And some of them they look at and they say, well, it's ripe now, ready to eat now, but it's not going to make it, or they just get excess. We got all this for free yesterday. I get it every week, and we just get it for the chickens. While we're in here, Super, I'm just going to show you this guest house. It's just another house that nobody's using now.
Oh, it is.
Nice little house, 1 bedroom. It's got the fireplace and the kitchen and the nice patio out there, and it's got a little brick barbecue. And
I thought his house was going to be this big. I mean, it's not a bad house.
Use the garage to store all the vegetables for the chickens.
That's a big storage building for that amount of food. But y'all, we're watching this, and I've never seen this, but we are watching this because he's going to say some things that's really bad, and I'm waiting for it. Then I'm going to timestamp it so I know where it is.
Peek out the back window here, you can see the little brick barbecue over there in the corner. So it'd be a nice little place, peaceful place to live, just back up here in the boonies with no neighbors or anything like that.
I like all the patios off of the bedrooms that you have. You have them everywhere, all over the place.
Yeah, like the weather's pretty nice year round down here, so it's good for doing things outdoors. So
chickens eat watermelon, huh?
Yeah, they'll kind of eat everything, kind of like pigs and stuff, pigs and goats. I'll push them more here, and then you can just go in. Get out.
gosh.
I thought there were going to be more chickens than that. Y'all were waiting for a certain point in this interview where he starts talking about all of the illegal stuff.
A
That's
shame
what
for
we're
this
waiting
stuff to go
for.
to waste, so we just pick it up instead of letting them throw it away.
Well, that's
And
good.
you can get as much as you want. You can come down here with a dump truck and get all the watermelon, green beans, mangoes.
Don't cut a finger off, dude. Yeah, those chickens are fed very well.
Okay.
Probably
guess that's
better
it.
than I
As long
am.
as our water looks okay, Karen's.
We are on a lunch break for the George Kelly trial. They'll come back at 3:30
Are they
our
liking those
Central
green beans?
Standard Time
If we
ish.
wanted to, we
I
could
don't
just
know. I think they're
But-
gonna pass on the green beans versus the versus that watermelon.
Well, I guess, Karen, we're going to hop in the car now and go look at the border.
Okay, here's where
What
the
about those,
conversation's going to start.
vigilante groups? Are they out here?
There are people that'll come to the border thinking they're going to find some action. Like we had a rancher here that had been writing fan fiction on Amazon, and he was describing himself hunting migrants
Wow.
with his AK-47, and he actually even used his own name and his wife's name and his ranch's name, and he came from somewhere else. And then we caught him out there actually shooting at some people out there, shooting at some migrants,
Wow.
killed one of them, and one of them got away. So now he's being prosecuted for homicide in the county. So that's an example of a guy with that mentality. They come out here and they want to say, I'm out here in the Wild West, and they want to have a big, tough story to tell. I'm going to go out there and hunt me some Mexicans, you know, and that appeals to some people, but it's not a common thing. It's like, I mean, you would just be driving around.
He's an extremist.
Yeah, you would not see people like that. It's not like there's a bunch of groups wandering around with that attitude. Well, you ready to hit the road and go look at the border?
All right. Yes, sir.
And you just push it again to stop it. And then that's another time.
Pull over to the right.
Yeah, there you go.
Was it?
Yeah. Exactly, man. You got it down. You even got that authoritarian sounding voice.
Yeah, I switched up real quick, huh?
Now I'm going to pause up here on this curve so you can see all these
Sorry, I had
hills
a
back
delivery.
here that are part of the ranch just while we're up here high. That's all part of the ranch. This is where I grew up, milking the cows. I'd go find the cows.
I'm going to roll back
You would not see people.
because I didn't hear that.
Go to pause up here on this. Used
There
his
we
own
go.
name and his wife's name and his here that had been writing fan fiction on Amazon, and he was describing himself hunting migrants
Wow.
with his AK-47, and he actually even used his own name and his wife's name and his ranch's name, and he came from somewhere else. And then we caught him out there actually shooting at some people out there, shooting at some migrants,
Wow.
killed one of them, and one of them got away. So now he's being prosecuted for homicide in the county. So that's an example of a guy.
Oh,
with that
no.
mentality. They come out here and they want to say, I'm out here in the Wild West, and they want to have a big, tough story to tell. I'm going to go out there and hunt me some Mexicans, you know, and that appeals to some people. But it's not a common thing. It's like, I mean, you would just be driving around.
He's an extremist.
Yeah, you would not see people like that. It's not like there's a bunch of groups wandering around with that attitude. Well, you ready to hit the road and go look at the border?
All right. Yes, sir.
And you just push it again to stop it.
Why do you have
Another time.
Pull over to the right.
Yeah, there you go.
Was it?
Yeah.
I got him.
You got it down.
it was hard.
You even got that authoritarian sounding voice.
Yeah, I switched up real quick, huh?
Now I'm going to pause up here on this curve so you can see all these hills back here that are part of the ranch just while we're up here high. That's all part of the ranch. This is where I grew up, milking the cows. I'd go find the cows every morning in this pasture and bring them in and milk them before I went to school. Go to school with my boots all muddy and everything, and then come back and do it again in the evening. And then me and my dad would go work on the ranch at night. I mean, like on the weekends. But it's really pretty country, and especially in the summer, when it rains, it gets so green and nice. This little school here, my dad went to this school, I went to this school, and my grandfather was the first superintendent. It wasn't all this big stuff. It was just that one little building on the right. And I would walk to school every day, to this school when I was a kid. One of those bronze plaques to the left of the door is my grandfather. William Hathaway has a plaque with him there as the first school superintendent. When I went there and my dad went there, was just that one little red building. But now they've added all this other stuff in recently.
I accidentally
Well, let me ask you a
berated.
question, Super. That 100,000 subscriber plan.
Let me go
Are
fix this. I'll
people
be back,
just
y'all.
pawing all over that and begging to see that thing? Come on, feel free to brag. I know you're a modest guy.
No.
I'm here.
I thought that was impressive. You did the unboxing video, that nice mirror reflection
Oh,
play button. So look, you're being modest, man. I want to see that thing.
That
someday.
thing was something, man. To me,
Oh,
you know, to me, it was something no one else
Yeah,
cares
no,
about.
I love that video. You're talking about all the records you broke, you know, the oldest this, the youngest that. The first one, man, that was so funny. Me and my wife were just laughing at that. That was a good video.
Don't go looking it up, man. Just take my word for it.
Y'all, I'm appalled. I'm waiting to see if he says anything else.
Well, the road we're going on here is kind of paralleling the road we're on, but we're on the other side of the river. This is the Santa Cruz River. So now we're going to go up to the part of the border where there's no fence. There's just nothing. There's no fence or anything, but I'm going to go show you a part where you can see kind of two types of fences. There was a type that was put up when
Normandy
Trump was
fence?
president, and then there was the way it was before that. It used to be, when I was a kid, just a little 4-strand barbed wire fence, like a cattle fence
Mhm.
when I grew up, and you could just, you know, duck under the fence and go into Mexico, and you can still do that now.
Is that illegal to do?
Well, technically, like say you're a U.S. citizen, let's say you walked across into Mexico. Okay, that's not illegal, but they do have a crime in the U.S. called illegal entry. And what that is, that you're supposed to come back through a designated port of entry. And they've changed the rules during my life to where you're supposed to have a passport now to come back from Mexico. When I was a kid, up until I was maybe in my mid-20s, me and my wife just go to Mexico, and then you just walk back in and you just say, I'm a U.S. citizen, and they let you in, because they can't deny you admission to your own country. They can't tell you you can't come back to the United States if you're a U.S. citizen. But what they do now is they say you have to go through a designated port of entry and get inspected and show your documents. So yeah, technically it is a crime if you came in from Mexico and you just walked through the fence, even if you're an American. I don't know if they would ever prosecute anybody for that if you were an American. The prosecutors probably wouldn't care enough to prosecute you.
Now, that law that you were just telling me about, with at 100 miles of the border, you can pull people over.
There's an agency called Border Patrol, and now they're called CBP, Customs and Border Protection, but they still have an agency called the Border Patrol. And the Supreme Court has said that they, not me, that they can stop and deter and search and detain and interrogate anybody within 100 miles of the U.S. international border. And the Supreme Court has called that extended border search authority. But the problem with that is 2/3 of Americans, like we have about 340 million people in the U.S. now. So 2/3 of those, over 200 million people, live within that zone where the feds can pull you over and search you with no probable cause, no reason.
Wow.
So that would include cities like Chicago, New York, Miami, Los Angeles, Seattle, El Paso, Houston, New Orleans. They're all within 100 miles of the international boundary. So to me, it's a real problem to have a policy like that within the U.S. government, because we're supposed to be American. This is supposed to be a free country, right? I mean, you shouldn't have people who can just pull you over for no reason, like they're the Gestapo or something like that. So for me, that's a problem. that's Mexico right there. And it's like, you see, it's just peaceful. There's nothing going on here. It's safe. And if you go down into the canyon right there, there's no fence at all. But like right here, you can just walk under that, and that's Mexico. And you see that little pillar there, that white monument? That's a border monument. When they surveyed the border, that's a survey marker to show here's the international border with Mexico. If you can see that, it says boundary of the United States right there.
Boundary of the United States.
And it says
Sorry, the
by
Normandy
treaty
fence, what happens is the cartel, which was
established
the
by
fence you
treaties
saw
of
before the wall that Trump built, they
18
will
something.
get a
Yeah.
torch and
Pick
cut
me where the
that,
invasion is,
drive
where
a
the hordes are, and I
vehicle
go, well, I
in,
can take you
and
where
when they're
there's
done, put it back
no
together.
fence. Like here's where that fence ended, and here's what was
They
here
spare
before,
no expense.
and where you can just duck under it. And see, you're not going to see anything of all the many times, probably 100 times that I've taken media people here from all the national media where they want to go see it. I'm like, you're just going to hear the wind blowing and the birds chirping. People have tried to make it into a political thing like Democrat versus Republican, but you had record numbers of entries during both Democrat presidents and Republican presidents. Like there was a 24-year period where there was over 1 million people apprehended at the southwest border, and it was practically every year in the 80s and the 90s and 2000s with Republican presidents and Democrat presidents. The last 12 months of census data shows that the U.S. is growing at the slowest rate in its history. Where the river floods, it's usually just nothing here where you can just walk into Mexico.
Right
Yeah.
here, this was nothing there, no barrier.
Yeah, just nothing at all. Like, and usually so that the ranchers can return cattle to Mexico that get into this country, and so the ranchers in Mexico can return them to the U.S. They usually keep a spot where they can open up the fence. If they get through, the ranchers on this side will return them to Mexico, and then vice versa. Yeah, last time I was here, it was open there in the bottom.
That's
Get
not
one of the posts
necessarily
out of the
true.
way
The
and just
drug
put the
runners
cattle
do
through.
cut holes in them
And that's it.
and
then
run their
there's
drugs through.
that
Just
other
saying.
style of fence that was put up in the Trump era. But that's only near the city. Like if you go farther out of town towards those mountains, there's just no fence over there.
Is that fence keeping us safe?
Yeah, you can see all the terrorists right here that are trying to attack us. And as you can tell, if people want to come in, it's easy to come in. Once they're on U.S. soil, like say somebody walked through there right here, the fence, it could be, I'm on the U.S. soil, I claim asylum. When they get in the U.S., they're scheduled for a future hearing, but a lot of times that's years down the road, so they can get a hearing to see their asylum case, to see whether they're going to get documents. So it's kind of a weird system. What I think they should do, like when my phone rang a while ago, and that was an NBC reporter asking me about what needs to be done here. Do we need more immigration judges at the border? And that's what I always say. Instead of just deferring these things forever, instead of just creating an endless list of future hearings that are years down the road, why don't you just have the immigration judges right on the border and the people line up and they present their documents? If the answer is yes, it's yes. If it's no, it's no. Rather than just assigning them to some future.
Everybody has an
hearing.
opinion.
And
Everybody
here's a
thinks
weird
they
thing,
know how to
Super.
handle this, but
Depending
yeah,
on where you say
not
you're going,
everybody
if you
does.
cross here and you say I'm going to New York City has a backlog of 8 years on their hearings, on their asylum hearings. So if you say your destination is New York, you're not even going to get a hearing date until 8 years into the future. So it's basically you're allowed in for a future hearing that's going to be years down the road. And then they go wherever they go, and they're probably working on a farm or an apple orchard in southern Illinois or something like that while they're waiting for the asylum claim. That's kind of also weird that they can't get a work permit for the first 6 months. They can come in on asylum, but the federal government won't let them work for 6 months. They have to be here for 6 months and then apply for a work permit. And so now Canada is offering those people in the US, hey, come to Canada and we'll give you a work permit right away. So it's kind of, I mean, these political games that countries do. And I just want to point out to you, Super, we've been out here quite a while, walking along the border where anybody can walk in. And like I told you, when we get out here, it's just going to be peaceful. All you're going to hear is the wind blowing and the birds chirping. And this is the way it is when I bring news crews out here, and where you can see the wall has ended along here, and you can just walk under that.
Nothing holding you back.
No. And it's not like people think that it's going to be just Wild West out here, people with AK-47s, you know, ripping you off and shooting you and hijacking you and stealing your car and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, that really is how it's presented. I mean,
That
they're
does
saying that
happen a lot.
everything goes, the
It
women are being
happens.
raped.
Yeah, they're all getting raped, and they have their rape trees where they put their clothing up there for the trophies of the
Oh
rape.
my
And it's just
gosh, you're horrible.
sensational stuff.
Bring me Kitty,
Unfortunately,
Mary.
sells newspapers and gets you ratings and gets you clicks, you know, clickbait, click on this story. There's certain people that are on speed dial for the mainstream networks that will always give a crisis story. And there's certain ranchers, there's pet ranchers that know I can get on Fox News every week and all my friends and family will see me. All I have to say is they'll go get some piece of cloth and they say, I found this on the ranch. And you know what it is? It's a Muslim prayer rug.
Oh.
These Muslim terrorists are coming through my ranch. And if they say that, they'll get on the evening news. It'll get repeated over and over and played a bunch of times. It'll get cycled through like for weeks through the news cycle. But if I come out here and say it's peaceful, it's like, man, I want to see a gun battle. There's nothing interesting here. You know, like if I just come tell the truth and they're like, hey, call me back when there's something exciting happening. So you have, unfortunately, those politicians, like there's a sheriff in Yuma who's like that. He's got a bunch of retired older people, and it's sad to say, because I'm getting to be older, but older people are easy to scare, and people move to Arizona to retire. They didn't grow up here, and they don't know that it's actually peaceful, so it's easy for a politician to tell them, you need to be scared, you need to be very scared. You better elect me because this is so out of control. You need to give me more money and more officers to keep you safe. You got certain politicians that'll just scare them, like the sheriff in Cochise County or Yuma County will do that. The sheriff in Pinal County, even though he's not on the border. Now the sheriff for Pima County, which is Tucson, they have a big piece of the border. He's like me, and he'll tell you the truth. You know, he'll tell you like what it's really like. And I'm sad to say, you know, like I'm not anti-Border Patrol agent, you know, but there's so many atrocities out here by Border Patrol, just shooting people, and then they never get prosecuted for it or anything like that. And I think it's kind of turning into a police state where Border Patrol now has these rights to just pull you over and arrest you within 100 miles of the border and detain you and interrogate you with no probable cause. But they have authority by the Supreme Court that says within 100 miles of the international border, they can pull you over for no reason under what they call extended border search authority. I grew up being told, hey, this is the United States, this is America. You don't get pulled over at checkpoints where you have to show your papers in this country. That's what they have in the Soviet Union. But guess what? That's what it's turning into here. And I'm kind of surprised that Americans aren't a little more stubborn about their freedom. Hey, you know, just let me live my life. I don't need some cop following me around, pulling me over all the time. We don't like the optics of all the war zone type stuff.
I'll probably get
because it
copyrighted
hurts
on
our
that
economy.
music,
I mean,
y'all.
we're not a rich county. Like we have the 4th highest unemployment rate of all counties in Arizona down here in this county. So this kind of imagery makes it look like a scary place, like a war zone, you know, all the razor wire and all that kind of stuff. So I'm opposed to that. The mayor and the city council down here are opposed to that. We do what we can to put up a friendly image, keep people coming down to escape the heat. It's cooler here than Tucson or Phoenix in the summer. Come to Nogales to escape the heat. enjoy the nice shopping and restaurants and all that stuff. During that whole Title 42 time, our economy really got messed up. Nobody could cross at the regular ports of entry.
God,
Even
Woolworths.
people
I haven't
that
seen
had
a Woolworths
paperwork,
in
they had little
ages.
visas. And all these businesses downtown here in Nogales rely on the business
Uh-oh.
from Mexico, the people crossing in and shopping on this side. So
What's going on
during the
with
whole
the fire
COVID
truck?
era, they said nobody can cross except for essential purposes. So they turned away all the regular shoppers, and all these businesses downtown here, 90% of them were closed down for 2 years during the whole COVID era. These are school kids that are going back to Mexico. This time of day, they're getting out. A lot of them live in Mexico and they come across and they go to school in the US. You'll see them going back to Mexico. So a lot of them went bankrupt and went out of business. And it was only because the US government wouldn't let Mexicans come across to shop, but Americans could go down to Mexico and shop down there, you know. So they were saying, oh, we don't want to have people intermingling, so we don't want to let Mexicans come over. They might spread germs or disease.
Wow.
But at the same time, Americans were allowed to go to Mexico, to the beaches, Rocky Point, Guaymas, Mazatlan, and there was no restrictions on their travel. So it was kind of like a weird rule that to me didn't make a lot of sense. But when that came to an end, these businesses came back to life because they just depend on Mexico. All this downtown businesses, they depend on shoppers from Mexico because the town in Mexico is 15 times bigger population than the town on this side in Arizona. They're both the same name. It's Nogales, Arizona in the United States, and Nogales in the state of Sonora in Mexico. Just happens a lot more people live on that side. All these cars passing left to right in front of us are all coming from Mexico into the US because the port of entry is just there to the left. We can go park the car and just go walk into Mexico unless you want to see anything else downtown here.
How long have you been sheriff?
Just 3 years, and I'm starting my campaign. It's a 4-year term, so I'm starting my campaign for next time.
No, you didn't do it.
The election is next year, and there's already 6 guys that have filed to run. So there's already 6 candidates. And when I won, there was also 6 guys running for sheriff. So it was, I thought, well, it's going to be kind of hard, but me and my wife just went out every day knocking on doors. And you met her. She would stay up, old school campaigning. She would stay up every night to midnight writing handwritten letters to all the people that we talked to every day.
Right.
And so that personal touch, like nowadays, nobody gets a letter. Everything is electronic, text message, email. So people will still come up to her in the store and hug her today. Oh, I still got your letter that you wrote me. But just the, shoe leather campaign, knocking on thousands of doors. And we wrote lots of letters and just talked to a lot of people. Didn't rely a lot on advertising, just in-person, old-fashioned campaigning. Plus, some people knew the family because we've been here since the 1800s. There was the name recognition. So I've been coming here since I was a kid, like with my parents shopping and
I don't
coming
like
to get
this
haircuts
dude.
and stuff. Like you see, this is all kind of a row of pharmacies right here.
He paints
People
out
come
Americans to be
because they
horrible.
don't need a prescription, and you can get
Very
whatever you want, your
pro-immigrant.
antibiotics and stuff like that.
Not to say we can't be
Do you like
pro-immigrants.
coming over also to get a feel since we are bordering each other?
Oh yeah,
Feel the climate kind of.
yeah, and the people are very friendly down here, really easy to talk to.
You notice his name
not
badge is
scary or
taken
anything
off.
like
He
that.
has no ID.
A lot of money
doesn't look
exchange
like a
houses
sheriff.
down here because people earn pesos down here and they exchange them for dollars so they can go shop in the U.S. Like all these ones on the left, they're all money changers.
Bunch of military guys all in the back of the pickup.
They're
Now we
machine-
get into
machine
the
guns in
action now. Fighting the cartels, what they're doing, huh?
Oh man.
No badges show him. His ID that he had clipped on is taken off.
Man, super, too bad. If you don't find any action, you're going to go home. You'll be hanging your head, telling the family, I saw nothing. It's just totally dead.
Oh my God, on both sides, man.
Yeah.
At least on this side is supposed to be on and popping, man.
Yeah. I'll show you.
This is everybody going back in.
Yeah. So that's about an hour and a half right here. When it's up this far, could be 2 hours. Depends on how quick they're doing the inspections because it goes down here and all the way down that side by all the pharmacies and then goes the other way.
So how long did it take you to
towards the
cross that?
pedestrian. And then the cars are
To
lined
show
up
your
over
badge
there
and
even
walk
farther.
across?
They'll be backed up for miles going back.
Did you
that
get
way.
to
So
go and
in a
escape the
car,
lines because you're a
you gotta have
sheriff?
good cooling system or your car overheats sitting in line.
And
for
some
that long.
gas in there too, huh?
Yeah. So I'm going to show you one of the, just like these curio shops that have all the handcrafted stuff and everything. ¿Qué tal, mijito? No tiene las placas de vehículos de los varios estados, como antes tuvieron. De Hawái no tiene.
Sí,
Déjame ver. This guy always has a bunch of license plates from all the states in the U.S. If you have a state that you want the license plate from, like Wisconsin or Minnesota.
Are they legal or illegal? Are they stolen plates?
Oh, okay.
Are they stolen? I would not buy a plate.
How many you need? 100?
Puro Sonora. Entonces, so these are all for this state. Sometimes they would have for other states like Chihuahua or Oaxaca or something like that. Sometimes they would have.
Are they stolen plates?
Different states like there.
My
In a
question.
lot of the states down south and stuff. Sometimes they would have those, but now they just got like the Sonora, which is this state. They're all Mexico, but they're just different styles.
No, they're not. This is California.
I say this one right here.
Y más. Esta es Sonora, mira. Esta es Sonora que está ahí. Esta es Sonora. Hola. México, México, México.
Ese para camión, no?
Sí, es para camión.
And this, what the purple ones, it's for the cargo trucks, like tractor trailers. They have
For
the
trailer.
purple thing like that.
How much is this?
This one, this is $20. Free
Thank
shot of
you.
tequila.
Yep.
Free shot of
Where do you
tequila
come
in the
from?
house.
Mucho.
Acá de Nogales.
You from Nogales?
Ahí está la voz ahí.
Sí, desde los 1800.
No, you look like a Texas.
No,
Es más mentirosa que este.
Ustedes puros jóvenes que no saben nada de la historia de la región. Mi familia de vaqueros desde los 1800.
Ah,
Oh,
pues
really?
tu familia.
Yeah, yeah.
¿Qué sí que este es 1910 este?
No, I'm not from here. I'm from Michoacán.
So is he asking
No,
for a
no,
family
Guadalajara,
discount?
they're-
Michigan.
Okay.
Ponchos,
I got it.
yeah.
Let me
I
show
got
you.
familia.
This is Mexican.
Muy impresionante. Wow.
Yeah.
Try out, no
And
problem.
this is washable. Put it in the machine and cool water and not shrink. This is 100% wool.
Oh, this one has a hood too, huh?
Yeah, because look about it. See cotton? But cotton, you know what? Cotton got shrink in half. Look
Para
at
algo
this
así, ¿cuánto costará algo así?
one. This one, this is 120.
So,
Oh,
sheesh.
look it.
What we talking? He talking about U.S. dollars?
Yeah.
Jeez.
No.
I remember going-
Cotton.
While
That's
they're
okay,
doing
that's
that, I
okay.
remember
No, I
my
got one
mother
cheaper
and
like
father taking
No,
us
but you said for $120.
to the border.
No, but these
Sí,
Um,
20?
no,
Laredo
but the different ones. I have
when we were real little,
Okay.
and I
Yo
had
necesito
white hair,
más.
How much you
¿Dónde
want?
Más.
están nosotros?
white
Está
hair.
buscando una
Really
gana,
little
pues.
thing.
Okay,
Pero
here,
gana, mira.
Um,
Gana es esta,
At
mira.
the age of 5, I
Oh,
was
dinero,
literally
señor.
28
You don't like this
inches
one right
tall and weighed 29 pounds.
That one is cheaper.
Está
¿Cuánto?
bien.
I was a very tiny thing. And so they took us, my twin brother and I, one time, and was probably
Supposed
close
to be helping me out here.
No,
to 5,
don't.
6, 6.
Come on, man.
This one is cheaper.
Oh, this
I
is
was
cheaper.
so
You come
terrified.
over all the time. Man. You're
Because
supposed to be.
Walk down the
These guys
street,
are ready to work
everybody's
me
trying to
over.
grab
No,
your
look,
attention to tell like,
It's part of the experience.
come here, come here, come here.
Hey, this is the cheap.
And they hold up their wares.
They go shrink in half. They lose the color.
My mama got me one of the little Mexican
Real
dresses,
Yeah, like Pancho Villa, you know,
but this lady ran up to
¿Cuánto,
me
señor?
that one,
and
this is
and
65 for you.
actually multiple
No,
ladies,
because
they
it's
touched my
85,
hair.
because you come with this guy from
And it got really unnerving
Okay.
because everywhere I went,
that's
I
85
kept
for the
touching my
police.
hair.
That's too much.
You know what?
And
Look,
I
wait, sir,
didn't know
you'll
until
give me 80
recently.
for the police.
A friend of mine who
Yo
grew up in the
necesito
south side of
oro
San Antonio,
por
I did
gratis.
grow up on the south
No,
side,
I
I grew up on the
don't.
northwest side, but
No,
um,
nada. The-
as an adult, I lived on all
They don't want me to tell you, but there's
quadrants
a
of
bunch
San
of ones over
Antonio,
there that
including the
have
Okay.
south side,
All right.
for
So
a
we're
period
gonna go
of time.
look.
But
Okay.
she explained to me that when
Wow.
they
Like, how much you want
admire
to spend for this?
something, they have to
Give me a
touch it
good
or
deal,
it's bad
senor.
luck.
But they
I don't have.
So those
how
women
much
were admiring my hair and they
Uh,
had to touch it or it would have been bad luck.
40.
Oh, no, come on.
But-
You made
For
it
todo.
in China.
They
40
are
por todo.
they are
You wanna rent
hardworking
it or you wanna
people.
buy it?
Buy
They're
it.
they're
Yeah,
trying to
because
sell.
if you wanna rent
You
it,
know, I mean, that's all they have. That's what they
Yeah,
do.
give me 70.
You know,
But the
and I
hundred
have
is
no
too
problem
much,
with
No,
man.
that.
because I
But
do this 150 and
you
20
know,
for the
for a little girl, it's
That's a good deal.
scary.
All right. Keep
Right
these
back.
together.
Oh,
And
the
then
same
we go-
system- the same time everybody no come back. Mira, here, look it. 65, okay.
For the-
For the
for
whole
the
enchilada.
For everything?
Yeah,
For todos?
Yeah.
Okay, keep this because I want you to take me to where.
Okay. What the heck the most you can.
Mira, look, here, wait. I want you to take it. Give me $60 for the two. I come down a lot. You know, I come down
I know.
$20. $60 for the
Señor, gracias for lowering the price. Yo tienes no dinero.
No,
at
no
all.
está hecho de oro, tiene su criatura, tiene los hijos y también.
Yeah, for me, and over there, it's no
Mira,
buenos.
I was
No
telling them about
buenos.
you got family and everything.
Yeah, my
55.
family, mi esposo, yo
55.
tienes chiquito, niño,
Hey,
señor.
55.
Por favor, 40.
No,
No? Okay,
55.
so listen. Hold on to this, because yo te gusto mucho. Hold on to both of these, and then I go over there, and I'm going to see, and then, señor, escucha, por favor. I'm going to go over there.
Mira, here, don't $50 here.
50.
Yeah.
Okay. Put it
I wanna look at the sale because
50
it's no
total.
business.
50 total.
50 for total. It's no business.
It's no
Very
business.
slow. No, it's around. It's no business. Very quiet. We having a week no sales. Give me 50.
50. Open the wallet.
Let me see what I got in here.
Oh, no
Oh,
cry,
like a
Manuel.
Mexican. You cry like a Mexican.
No cry.
Sure.
Oh, you got it?
Señor, no más.
Entonces vamos a pasear un rato para ver los
Mira,
sombreros.
45, okay.
45.
No,
45.
no más.
You cry like a Mexican.
So,
Yeah, like you got no more. That's it.
so 40. Está bien.
Dásela.
Está
Okay.
bien.
Okay.
Gracias.
Thank you.
señor.
Thank you.
Gracias.
You don't forget.
My license plate.
Yes.
Thank you.
He puede quedar dando
You
feria.
wanna see that? You should wanna see a hat?
Just a nice cowboy hat.
Oh, like a cowboy. I got
Yeah.
it.
And they got a store over here that's got a bunch of those.
Yeah.
How'd I do that? Was okay.
That was good. like
All right.
I was telling you, you cry like a Mexican.
Sorry about
You
that.
got away, Laura.
Anyway, I was saying that when I was a little girl, we did that.
was
They'd
good
run up
talking
to me
about
in
the
the
babies
street,
and the
want my
family
mom
and
to
the
buy a
wife.
dress or
I pull
clothes,
at the heartstrings.
Yeah, you
touch my hair. Oh, darn.
I show you the hat.
Not every, I don't believe that every Mexican illegal is a bad person or anybody illegal. They're not all bad people, but there are some. And I struggle with this sheriff
Gotta be right here.
and the way he
I have look at.
is representing in this video.
I like that hat. How much for a hat like that?
Throw on.
see how that looks on you.
It's pretty good, man.
And it does have the two horses like that poncho.
I told you. Look at this one. That matches too.
It's the same.
Yeah.
How much for a hat like this?
That one is 45.
Sheesh.
Yeah, no.
$45 US, that's cheap.
That's a good looking hat. It looks good with the that poncho. It's like they were made for each other. They both have the
With
two
the horse-
horses. Yeah.
The horse theme and stuff.
They got
All the
him.
presents and stuff.
Look
There's
what
a
they did to this
radio
poor
station
guy.
right there that I do a lot of interviews at, right where it says XENY. Their studios are upstairs. I do. It's probably where they're doing a promotional drive with that radio station. I think they have a thing called Cartitas a Santa, and you can sponsor a gift for a kid. They'll say that they want like a new shoes or a doll or something like that. We can go ask them if that's what it is.
And that's what they're doing, huh?
I'm kind of guessing it is. ¿Qué tal este de la cartita a Santa? ¿Qué están haciendo? Okay, con el profesor Encinas, ¿no? Yeah, it's like, that's what they're doing, that thing, letters to Santa Claus, and then they do it over the air, and then people will call in and
Like our
sponsor
blue Santa
a
or
certain
angel
kid that
tree.
wrote a letter, and they'll read them out over the air, and then
My lips are dry.
you buy the stuff, and then you bring it in, and I guess they're loading it up to deliver them. It's kind of a neat thing.
So you walk these streets many years, huh?
Oh yeah, a lot of come down here. We would buy sugar down
You
here.
can see
and
the
get
wall right there.
Coca-Cola in the bottles down here, cheaper, and some people say the Mexican Coca-Cola tastes better because it's made out of the real sugar or something. I don't know if that's true, but we would our whole life
There's
come
the
down
wall.
here and do buy certain kind of things. Get our haircuts down here and buy.
Would you come
Certain
down with the whole family, or sometimes you just?
No, just myself. My wife's the same thing. When she was a kid, just walk down here to get an ice cream cone or to do something. My wife worked right along the border, and there was a Walgreens right here next to this port of entry, and she worked there, and then I worked here right near the border at a McDonald's when I was in high school. Now you see that picture coming up of a young man is where a Border Patrol agent through the fence shot a young man. I think he was 16, shot him 10 times with an M4, which is basically an M16. And he said the kid was throwing rocks at him. So, you know, it's kind of a little bit hard to imagine. And then
There was the retaliation,
the retaliation. And then they charged the agent, but they dropped the charges, and there's a civil lawsuit, and they dropped that too. So they do have like a little thing once a year where the people will gather along the wall here and remember that day when that happens.
And that's him right there, the kid?
Yeah.
Wow. Shot him 10 times.
Yep. Yeah, through. So it's kind of hard to believe there'd be
U.S.
a threat to
Border Patrol
guy
did?
up on that side where you just shoot somebody in Mexico. And there's just some little poem, I guess, in remembrance of that kid right there. And it says,
See, he's
let me
really
translate it into English.
painting
It
out
says,
Americans to be
"The
horrible.
strong
But
instinct
you're
to
not
preserve
talking
one's
about
life,
what the Mexican cartel and all
against
them do.
hunger,
I want to,
violence,
it's not
war is very strong.
just
Uh,
the American.
we are the refuge for the fugitives of the whole world that have left their houses and leaving with nothing, remaining with nothing. Quedándose sin nada. And then it says asylum in Spanish, asilo.
Okay.
So it's kind of a tribute to people who are seeking a better life in another country.
So now you're going to go stand 2 hours in that line? Gosh, that line is long.
Yeah, super.
See his
This, of
name
course, my
tag back
car,
on.
patrol car, and it's, you know, it says Sheriff Hathaway, and it's got the badge on it, and here's got the words on the back. Like a lot of sheriffs nowadays, they'll go on an undercover plainclothes car, but I like people to know it's me, so they know I'm approachable. I'm an elected official, so I like people to be able to come
You're more
talk
of
to
a
me. Now,
politician than a
here's the
sheriff.
sheriff's office here, and we're walking in right here. There's two entrances. That's the jail on the left. It says Adult Detention Center, and this is the sheriff's office on the right here. So it's kind of a nice time of day, like sunset here, and you can see up here on the door, it says Sheriff David Hathaway there on the door.
He's
Now
really
this
talking about
lobby is
himself a lot,
really
Sheriff
unique. They
Hathaway.
did
Sheriff
this like
Hathaway.
a year ago. I got an artist from Mexico. He came and painted all this to look like an old-fashioned jail, and he did an incredible job. You see, like just on the bathroom doors, the wood grain there, how he painted all that, and then he made it look like there's
Good
a
way to
jail
spend
here.
tax money.
And, you know, like here's the entry door. And he said, you know what, I'm going to paint just the silhouette of a prisoner. So you could tell people that could be you in there, like not a face on it, but just kind of a silhouette. And then he actually signed the wall right down here, Arturo Pino. When he painted it, he signed the wall right there. And my office is just down here at the end of the hall.
But this is more about him than the actual American
My little
Mexico
conference room in here, so I can have meetings with like the command staff, the commanders and sergeants and stuff like that. And here,
I'm trying now.
This is my office, and this was my dad's desk when he was the county attorney. And before that, there was a sheriff in this county named J.J. Lowe, and this was his desk, and he was the sheriff from 1939 to 1958. So it's one of these old roll top type desks. So it was the sheriff in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, and then it was my dad's when he was county attorney and judge, and then my mom gave it to me recently. So I just got that in there, but I have my regular modern desk over there too. And then here's where I do a whole bunch of interviews. And
Can
then
you clean up
the
your
NBC reporter lady, she said, you got to make yourself a backdrop, and you got to get yourself a ring light. You got to get yourself one of these doodads. This NBC reporter lady got me set up to where I do my interviews here. Then I can just clamp the smartphone or the tablet there, and then extend it up to
proud of
color,
it.
you know. And then she actually trained me to do this.
They got you all primed up,
She
man.
did, you know.
Idiot. I'm sorry. This does not make me appreciate this guy anymore. Okay, I want to go back
Yeah,
all the way
why
back to 13.
those a vigilante.
I want you to hear what
And
he
then
says
in the car now and go look at the border.
about the vigilantes.
What about
the
those
vigilantes.
vigilante groups? Are they out here?
There are people that'll come to the border thinking they're going to find some action. Like we had a rancher here that had been writing fan fiction on Amazon, and he was describing himself hunting migrants
Wow.
with his AK-47, and he actually even used his own name and his wife's name and his ranch's name, and he came from somewhere else. And then we caught him out there actually shooting at some people out there, shooting at some migrants.
Wow.
Killed one of them, and one of them got away. So now he's being prosecuted for homicide in the county. So that's an example of a guy with that mentality. They come out here and they want to say, I'm out here in the Wild West, and they want to have a big, tough story to tell. I'm going to go out there and hunt me some Mexicans, you know, and that appeals to some people, but it's not a common thing. It's like, I mean, you would just be driving around.
He's an extremist.
Yeah, you would not see people like that. It's not like
Okay,
there's a
y'all.
bunch of groups
I
wandering
found
around
it.
with that attitude. Well, you ready to hit the road and go look at the border?
Okay, I found it on Amazon. Okay, here it goes. Far Beyond the Border Fence. It's a Kindle edition, or you can, I don't think you can even buy a book. And it states this book is about Far Beyond the Border Fence is a contemporary novel which brings the Mexican border/drug conflict into the 21st century. The owner of the VMR Ranch, located in southern Arizona, on the border, discovers two of the rancher's prized quarter horses are missing, and that his southern fence leading into Mexico has been cut. What follows will require a gallant effort not only to retrieve his beloved horses and to rescue members of his family, but to face an international plan to destroy twin Mexico cities. This is fiction, published in 2013. How many has he sold? You know what? There's nothing wrong with writing a fiction. It's 57 pages. There is absolutely nothing wrong with this. Nothing. I'm going to see if I can share this. Yeah, copied link. I'm going to send my buddy. I need to send it to me in a text message. Okay, we are still on lunch, y'all, I believe. Yep. We're still on lunch break. What time is it? Oh, we got 30 more minutes. I need to send both of these links. I knew I could. Oh, let's go to Facebook. Nope. I have a 3 o'clock. Oh, I'm going to have to let y'all go. I do have a 3 o'clock Zoom. So let me do this. I'm going to let you go. We will come back after my Zoom and we shall catch up and go for the rest of the closing arguments. With that, y'all be blessed. I'll be back on in a little bit. Thank you guys. Have an awesome rockin' afternoon, and I'll see you in a few.